I'm the highest civilization in the universe. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 251. Are you an alchemist? The war was still going on, and the clone army gradually gained the upper hand. Although the spaceships of various galaxies were desperately resisting, they could only retreat step by step. Li Ming had already come to a huge cabin at this moment, which was a house in Dali's camp. The reason why it was called a cabin was that the design of the house was completely like the cabin of a spaceship, which was completely different from the one in the building. Not only was the structure different, but even the decoration and walls inside were also like the mechanical cabin, as if it was in a spaceship. At this time, Dali's petite figure was walking in the corridor on a floater. This floater was half a foot high from the ground, and there was a phantom control line extending in front of Dali, which could not only replace the legs to move forward, but also control the movement of the entire camp through the control line. While walking, the control line suddenly flashed slightly, and the line spread out to both sides like a scroll, forming a screen picture, showing Dalton's face. King Dali, Hender is going to destroy our camp. Dalton in the picture reported nervously and seriously. Dali looked calm, as if he didn't care about those things at all. He said lightly, "You handle these things. Didn't I tell you? I have something important to talk about now, and I don't want to be disturbed by anyone." "Yes, I understand," Dalton replied quickly. As soon as he finished speaking, the picture disappeared, and the screen gathered again, and became a line again. Dali continued to move forward along the corridor, but great changes had begun to take place outside. A huge electromagnetic wave sphere had condensed directly under the semicircular giant spaceship, and the powerful energy fluctuations made the air around it emit a sizzling sound. The electromagnetic wave was hundreds of meters wide, several times larger than when it destroyed the buildings in the assembly camp before, and its power was naturally different. Although it had not been launched yet, such a huge energy body had begun to affect everything around it. The wind and sand on the ground became more intense, and the sand and dust continued to float into the air under the influence of the wind. A huge wind and sand vortex had formed, just like a tornado, that had just risen from the ground, but the wind was not strong, but the scale was very amazing. The entire Dali camp was covered in grey dust, the ground was covered with sand and wind, and the sky was also filled with dark clouds. The airflow was spinning and dancing under the action of energy, as if all the clouds were gathering here. Just looking at this celestial phenomenon, one can feel the power of this electromagnetic wave energy. Of course, only a high-level civilization can create such a powerful and destructive weapon, and the energy consumption of each attack is unimaginable. With such a strange phenomenon in the sky, the ground began to change. Several buildings in the camp began to float slowly. These buildings were of different shapes, but the undulating state was the same as that of ordinary aircraft taking off. 7 or 8 huge buildings slowly left the ground and came into the air. Without these buildings, the original ground suddenly looked a bit empty. At this time, Dalton was in a building in the air. The huge operating table was intertwined and changed in front of his eyes. The blue lines were intertwined layer by layer, and the buildings that flew into the air were all presented in the form of phantoms on the operating table. Little bear number 1 begins to merge. A prompt sounded immediately, and the long building and other buildings kept approaching steadily and perfectly combined together. The sound of pa 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 kept ringing, just like the combination of transformers. The connection of each limb showed the perfect fusion of energy and machinery. After a moment, a giant robot appeared. The appearance was smooth and bright, and the metal body was like a mirror. After combining advanced high-level scientific and technological civilization technology, the robot's strength and momentum were fully demonstrated. The surface of the robot was prism-shaped, like pieces of mirrors assembled. The head was a bit like a bear, and the body was thick and huge. The height of hundreds of meters still looked very small in front of the huge semicircular spaceship. Although the little bear number 1 robot was hundreds of meters tall, its overall size was the same as the electromagnetic wave ball that was ready to be launched at the bottom of the semicircular spaceship. Despite this, Dalton still had a confident look on his face. Looking at the robot data on the console, he suddenly shouted, "Go, little bear number 1." With a shout, the little bear number 1 robot suddenly moved and ran straight towards the electromagnetic wave ball. At this moment, Li Ming and Ali were standing in a cabin and talking to each other. This cabin was relatively empty, like an empty room, without decorations or ornaments. Apart from the portal and the walls on all sides, nothing else could be seen. However, with a slight sense, Li Ming could still sense the energy in the room. Dali looked at Li Ming and smiled slightly, saying, "Now, can we talk about the deal between us?" Li Ming was still calm, raised his hand, and took out 5 nebula pills again, saying, "The things are here. I wonder what you, the businessman, are going to exchange for them." Dali glanced at the nebula pill in Li Ming's hand, nodded slowly, and said nothing, but smiled faintly. Li Ming narrowed his eyes slightly at this, and the other party's thoughts had been completely detected. He suddenly realized in his heart, and then clenched his right hand, and put away the nebula pill. Although he saw through the other party's thoughts, Li Ming did not say it, and still pretended to be ignorant. Seeing this, Dali smiled and said, "Nebula pill is indeed a good thing, but I don't want something as simple as nebula pill. Since I'm a businessman, I must maximize my profits as much as possible, so you, the alchemist, don't have to hide yourself." Dali looked at Li Ming with a strange look, and the corners of his mouth couldn't help but rise slightly, as if he had really found a treasure. Li Ming didn't respond to him immediately. His eyes moved slightly, and he began to think. The current situation was not what Li Ming wanted. The reason why Li Ming wanted to trade with the other party was just to avoid the pursuit of Hender and Hart's space forces. By the way, he sold some nebula pills in exchange for nebula power, but he didn't expect that the guy in front of him would have more ideas about taking out 5 nebula pills at once. After thinking for a while, Li Ming smiled lightly and said, "How do you plan to trade?" Hearing Li Ming's words, Dali suddenly became more excited and said quickly, "So, you are really an alchemist?" Li Ming still did not comment. After hesitating for a while, he replied, "I can't say I'm an alchemist, but I know some alchemy techniques, and my success rate is about 30% to 40%. Dali laughed and nodded uncontrollably. After taking 2 steps forward, he said, "That's great. Since you can make alchemy, we can cooperate, and I guarantee we can make a lot of money. As for the way of cooperation..." Dali was about to continue speaking when the ground suddenly shook and a muffled sound came from the outside world, making people feel a little uneasy. Dali frowned and glanced at the blue line in front of him. A beeping sound kept coming from it. Dali didn't pay much attention, but his face was slightly anxious. He forced a smile at Li Ming and said, "We'll talk about cooperation later. I have some urgent matters to deal with here. You can look around first." Li Ming was also surprised by the vibration and sound, but he didn't think about it. He smiled back at the other party and said, "Please." Dali turned around in a hurry and left the portal quickly. At this time, great changes had taken place outside. In the sky, the semicircular spaceship continued to fly, and the electromagnetic wave ball that had been condensed at the bottom of the spaceship had completely disappeared. At the same time, right below the spaceship, little bear number 1 was staring at the spaceship. In the main cabin of the semicircular spaceship, Hender stared at the operating table with wide eyes, and he didn't come back to his senses for a long time. "What's going on? That robot actually swallowed the attack just now." Hender looked at the scene on the operating table with an unbelievable expression, and muttered to himself. At this time, Egan stepped forward and said, "This kind of technology may come from an advanced civilization." Hender turned his head and stared at Egan. Egan was shocked and bowed quickly, saying, "According to the known information, Dali once obtained the technology of an advanced civilization, which is why he can be so powerful alone." Chapter 252 Confidential. Hendrik stood up straight, his arms involuntarily folded in his arms. His eyes looked at the operating table coldly, hesitating for a moment, and whispered, "Retreat. Go and meet Hatfield." "Yes." Egan bowed his head and replied, turning around and leaving. Hender's face was still unwilling, but his eyes revealed a bit of anger and helplessness. The giant semicircular spaceship in the sky hummed for a while, and then flew away helplessly. At this time, in a cabin in the construction area below, Dali was flying quickly on a floater. Before and after arriving at a portal, Dali stretched out his right hand and swiped it inside, and the light flashed. The portal changed from ordinary blue to white, and then Dali entered it. With a flash of white light, Dali's figure walked out of another portal. At this time, Dali had come to a closed cabin. In the middle of the cabin was a 5-meter long and wide metal truncated table, like a big bowl. On top of the truncated table was a round energy ball, which looked like a drop of water, rolling and swimming non-stop, sometimes blue and sometimes white. The energy ball was flickering with starlight, like stars, which was extremely wonderful. On the top of the energy ball were 3 tubular objects, curved in shape, 1 meter thick, and extending to the top of the cabin in twists and turns. The mouths of the 3 tubes were aimed at the energy ball, and something like gas kept floating out and injected into the energy ball, as if providing the energy ball with a constant supply of energy. Dali slowly came to the truncated table, looked up at the energy ball, and unconsciously raised his right hand and gently pointed at the energy ball. Bang! A muffled sound was heard, and the energy ball suddenly emitted a blue light, reflecting the entire cabin in blue. After the blue light, circles of ripples rippled on the surface of the sphere. This energy ball was originally similar to a water drop, and the ripples at this time were more like small waves on the water surface, as if something had touched its surface. As the ripples flashed, the bottom of the truncated table suddenly lit up, and a thin thread of light shot out from the bottom. The light intertwined and merged in front of Dali's eyes, and finally turned into a series of alien characters. These characters were the information translated from the previous water ripples. After seeing this information, Dali frowned slightly, but soon raised his mouth and smiled faintly again. After a few seconds, the water ripples on the surface of the energy ball disappeared, and the light of the truncated table at the bottom also dimmed. The alien characters changed from dark to light and finally disappeared. Dali thought about it for a while, then turned around and walked away quickly. Back in the cabin, where Li Ming was, Dali's expression remained the same, without much change. After smiling slightly, he said, "Sorry, I kept you waiting for a long time." Li Ming smiled in response, and did not say much, but after Li Ming glanced at the other party, his face suddenly changed. With his wisdom, Li Ming discovered a huge secret in the other party's mind. This secret information was also what the other party was thinking about. Because it was too sudden, it was as if Li Ming suddenly knew something important that was closely related to him. In a hurry, Li Ming's expression also changed significantly, and he couldn't hide it quickly. Noticing Li Ming's sudden change in expression, Dali was also very surprised. He opened his eyes slightly and said, "What's wrong with you?" Li Ming came back to his senses after hearing this. He realized his gaffe, adjusted his mood, and his expression returned to normal. After a faint smile, he said, "No, nothing. Maybe I was too excited about the idea of launching a bigger cooperation." Ha ha ha. Dali laughed, nodded, and said, "Yes, if the nebula pill can be refined in batches, it will be of great benefit to you and me. Okay, speaking of this, let me talk about our cooperation." Dali changed the subject and immediately began to talk about the details of their cooperation. Li Ming narrowed his eyes and looked at the other person quietly. His ears were listening to the other person's words, but his heart was already full of thoughts about other things. Dali's mind was full of a lot of information, which could not be directly explored by the wise eyes. Some of them were accompanied by memory barriers, isolating Li Ming's consciousness. But among the visible information, there was one that had deeply attracted Li Ming. The content of this information turned out to be that Dali was in contact with the advanced civilizations of other galaxies. The discovery of this information also made Li Ming begin to re-examine the businessman in front of him. There is no doubt that this is definitely not an ordinary businessman. His overall strength can be compared with an ordinary star system civilization, and he himself has some connection with advanced civilizations. These 2 points alone are enough to prove that this person is extraordinary. Of course, what shocked Li Ming the most was that this galaxy outside the Milky Way just sent Dali a message about entering the Milky Way. In other words, Dali had previously sold the safe coordinates of the Milky Way to this galaxy outside the Milky Way at the cost of some kind of benefit. Now this alien galaxy wants to enter the Milky Way, which is not a small matter. In this way, Li Ming's interest was completely attracted, and the passive ability of the wisdom eye was fully opened. Li Ming began to explore the unknown secrets in Dali's mind in depth. Although some of the content took away the memory barrier, Li Ming, who had no memory barrier, still wanted to collect as much as possible. While Li Ming was exploring, Dali kept talking about cooperation, and the two talked to each other like this. While they were talking deeply here, the scene outside was already different. The clone alien army led by Hart had gained an absolute advantage in the air battle, and the joint forces of other civilizations were forced to retreat and evacuate. With the massive attack of the H-type spacecraft, new war weapons were also put into the ground battlefield. The huge H-type mothership in the sky trembled slightly. At the bottom of the spacecraft, the hatches were opened one by one, and black shadows kept falling from it. Just like a bomber dropping bombs, dense black spots fell straight to the ground from below. Bang, 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 bang. A series of sounds rang out, and each landing stirred up a lot of dust on the ground, just like a piece of iron falling down, and the earth trembled. In a moment, the entire area on the ground was completely covered by dust and smoke. Nothing could be seen except the dust. Only after all the black spots fell to the ground did the dust slowly fade away, and the falling objects became completely clear. At a glance, there were thousands of small robots, each 5 or 6 meters high. These robots were used for combat. Although their appearance was basically the same, their weapons were very different. Some carried two cannons, some held a long sword, and there were all kinds of them. These steel-made mechanical troops immediately rushed to the construction area after landing. At this time, there was almost no resistance in the construction area that could form a large scale, because the air supremacy was completely in the hands of the clones. With the entry of the ground troops, the surviving aliens in the construction area could only escape and evacuate quickly. This scene was presented in the form of a picture on the mothership's operating console. Hatfield looked at these with a serious expression, without much change. From the highest altitude perspective, the clones have controlled a large number of places, including the assembly camp, Rodini Free Zone, and Selrus Camp. The closest to these control areas is Dallas Camp, but Hart's troops have not yet developed in this direction. At this time, Li Ming has reached an agreement with Dali on the cooperation matters. Dali said with satisfaction, "From now on, I will provide the alchemy site, equipment, and materials, and I will also sell the refined pills. We will share the profits equally. This kind of cooperation is simply perfect. I can almost see a lot of profits waving to us." Ha ha ha. Dali laughed, and his face was full of pride. Li Ming just smiled in agreement, without much expression. Dali turned around, and looked at Li Ming solemnly. After hesitating for a while, he turned his right hand and a white thing appeared in his palm. It was the size of an egg and the surface was as smooth as a mirror. It looked like a precious gem. Dali stretched out his hand, and handed it to Li Ming, saying, "This is the key to the Weifeng 3 spacecraft. I'll give it to you now. You will live there first. I will send someone to deliver the first batch of materials to you." Li Ming raised his hand to take the thing, but as soon as he got it in his hand, he was shocked by the strong sense of technology. The thing was very light, and it was full of various information, all about the Weifeng 3 that Dali mentioned. He took it with his palm, smiled slightly, and said, "Okay, then I'll go see my residents first." Li Ming turned around, and left the place. Dali just nodded with satisfaction, and didn't say anything more. Weifeng 3, which sounds like the name of a spacecraft, is now located in the construction area of Dali Camp in the shape of mountain. Li Ming already knew about the buildings here. These buildings that look like houses are not buildings that are accumulated bit by bit from the ground, but are formed by the decomposition of various cabins. Chapter 253 Name. In short, Dali Camp is actually a building decomposition area. Some of the buildings are formed by the decomposition of giant spaceships or robots like Little Bear Number 1. They look somewhat similar to the decomposition of Inkina's spaceship, but they are more advanced. Inkina's spaceship can only become a decomposition cabin after decomposition, and it will also lose its combat effectiveness. Dali's are very different. They have powerful capabilities when separated and combined. This also explains why Li Ming felt like entering the cabin of a spaceship when he first entered here. Weifeng number 3, where Li Ming was assigned, is an independent huge building from the outside. It looks like a mountain, towering and majestic. The color is also somewhat like rock. It is nearly 100 meters high and dozens of meters wide. Under the guidance of the white key in his hand, Li Ming easily found the building. The surface of the white key constantly showed a picture of blue lines. Li Ming found this place just by following the instructions of this object. Simple and convenient. There is a portal at the bottom of Weifeng number 3. Li Ming stood quietly in front of the portal and looked at this building that looks like a mountain again. He did not enter directly. After looking at it, he did not forget to turn his head and look at the sky in the distance. The sound of the battle had become blurred, and it seemed to be far away from here, but the huge spaceship was still clearly visible in the distant sky, hence semicircular spaceship and hard sage-type spaceship. After a few casual glances, Li Ming entered through the portal. One of the reasons for choosing to continue to cooperate with Dali and stay here is Dali's secret and his own strength. There are not many people who can keep Hendrix out. Maintaining cooperation with Dali will undoubtedly ensure his own safety, which is one of Li Ming's goals. The portal flashed, and Li Ming came to the room. He glanced around and found that he was in the main cabin of Weifeng number 3. The huge operating table in the middle was the first to come into view. Coming to the operating table, Li Ming narrowed his eyes and began to explore the information on the operating table. After just a moment, Li Ming frowned and whispered to himself, the system of the spacecraft is in a closed state. The blue light flashed on the operating table, and all the information about the cabins of Weifeng number 3 was fully displayed, but the power system was never displayed. After Li Ming's test, he found that Weifeng number 3 was indeed a spacecraft operating alone. It's just that the power system has been turned off and needs to be turned on after biometric information recognition. In other words, the current Weifeng number 3 spacecraft has been turned off except for being able to move back and forth in various cabins. It is no different from an ordinary building. Humph. Li Ming smiled slightly, snorted contemptuously, and didn't care. This also explains why Dali would feel at ease to arrange Li Ming here alone. After checking the layout of each cabin, Li Ming turned around and left. After passing through another portal, Li Ming came to a new cabin. It was relatively closed and had only one portal. There were a lot of instruments placed in the room. These instruments were all used for alchemy, and of course there were some advanced technology products. Li Ming was deeply attracted after just a few simple glances. The layout of the room was relatively neat and regular, with items piled up on the left and right sides, an open space in the middle, and extending deep into the middle was another independent small cabin, like a built-in room. The door of the built-in room was a metal device, which was the same technology that Li Ming had encountered before. As long as he controlled it with his consciousness, the metal door would disappear into nothingness. Nothing could escape from his wise eyes. Li Ming's eyes turned, and he first stared at the alchemy tools on the left, and walked over. These tools were of different sizes, but the craftsmanship and materials were extraordinary. Li Ming's slightly narrowed eyes were instantly immersed in them. When he was an engineer, Li Ming had come into contact with a lot of alchemy tools, but compared with the ones here, it was like scrap iron meeting gold, not at the same level at all. Li Ming waved his right hand, and a small alchemy furnace flew to his palm. His eyes rolled back and forth on it, and he made a tsk sound from his mouth. A bunch of aliens who can't make pills have collected so many high quality alchemy tools. What a waste. Li Ming muttered to himself, his mind completely immersed in it. It is worthy of being a technological civilization. The tools are really perfect. With such tools in hand, it will be easier to make top quality pills. After looking at it for a while, Li Ming waved and put the alchemy tools back to their original place. Most of the alchemy tools of alien civilizations are nebula tripods. The difference in size only affects the number of pills to be refined and has nothing to do with the quality of the pills. The quality of the pills is more dependent on the methods of the alchemists, and secondly on the quality of the tools. These tools will naturally play a great role in Li Ming's hands in the future. Li Ming turned around and was about to walk to the right. The beast cloud clothes on the surface of his body suddenly flashed slightly, and Li Ming stopped in his tracks. After sensing the aura released by the beast cloud habitat, Li Ming waved his sleeves, and a red light and a grey light shot out from the clothes. As soon as they landed, they transformed into Moore and Walker. After releasing the two guys, Li Ming did not continue to walk towards the equipment on the right. Instead, he glanced at them and said, "I have some personal matters to deal with. I don't want to be disturbed. You can help me keep an eye on this place." As soon as the voice fell, Li Ming turned and walked towards the metal door in the depths. White light was seen flowing and flashing on the metal door. The metal door, that seemed unbreakable, suddenly turned into nothingness, as if there had never been a metal door here. Li Ming walked straight into it. As soon as he entered, the light flashed again, and the metal door returned to its original state. At this time, Moore on the ground stretched his waist, flapped his pair of fiery red wings a few times, and screamed. Walker, however, was calm, lying on the ground motionless, and in a lazy state. He glanced at Moore beside him and whispered, "What? Are you going to lay eggs?" Moore retracted his wings, snorted coldly, and walked towards the equipment not far away with his chest held high, saying, "There is no point in joking with me. See, this guy really treats us as watchdogs." Walker opened his eyes slightly, looked at Moore's back, and said, "I have already determined that he is my master. What he does is not important to me at all." TSK. Moore replied disdainfully, staring at a box in front of him, and then flapped his right wing, and the lid of the box opened. The box was filled with silver objects. These objects were smooth in appearance, the length of fingers, and looked like capsules. As Moore picked it up and played with it, he whispered, "A bald cat with no ambition, huh?" After muttering, Moore held up one of the silver capsules and looked at it with interest. At the same time, he seemed to suddenly remember something, glanced behind him and said, "Then, when are you going to tell him about that?" When Walker mentioned this, his eyes suddenly opened wide, and after staring at Moore for a while, his eyes slowly closed again and he said, "What does it matter whether I tell him or not? It's just a name." Moore's face suddenly changed when he heard this. His fluffy wings suddenly clenched tightly. He held the silver capsule tightly in his hand, turned his head stiffly back, and said, "This is the symbol of our true identity, Walker Scradina." Walker still closed his eyes, hesitated for a moment, rubbed his head on his paws a few times, and said, "So what? Moore Maxwell? You really don't care at all?" Moore's eyes flashed red, and his expression was somewhat unbelievable. But Walker remained motionless. After a short silence, he suddenly opened his eyes, turned his head, and looked at Moore, with a hint of coldness in his fierce eyes. "I should have reminded you long ago that I'm different from you. The master I have chosen will never change. Of course, I will also do my best to protect this loyalty. If anyone tries to break it." One of Walker's claws suddenly trembled a few times, and with a swoosh sound, 3 silver blades extended from the gap between the claws. The silver blades flashed with a dim light, revealing a cold light, which made people shudder after seeing it. Chapter 254 Wei Feng number 3. Moore's expression suddenly relaxed, and he spread his wings casually to both sides, walked out, and said, "Hey, I just asked casually, why bother? Since you don't like this topic, then we'll talk about it later. Anyway, it's quite boring to stay in that beast cloud habitat for a long time. I'll go outside to get some fresh air," Moore said as he walked towards the portal. Walker's cat claws moved, the sharp blade was put away, and his eyes slowly closed again. At this moment, Li Ming was concentrating and thinking about something with his eyes closed in the built-in room. The room was relatively empty, with nothing else except simple decorations, and it was more suitable for alchemy or star cultivation. The first thing Li Ming recalled in his mind was the previous secret about Dali. Dali left because of a huge vibration and noise when he was discussing cooperation with Li Ming. When he came back, Li Ming saw a huge secret through his wisdom eyes. That is, Dali was actually connected with advanced civilization. According to the information obtained from Dali's brain, the advanced civilization that Dali contacted was not in the Milky Way, but in a dwarf galaxy called Canis Major near the Milky Way. This galaxy is an irregular galaxy. The so-called irregular galaxy means that there is no obvious nucleus and spiral arms, no disc-shaped symmetric structure, and no rotational symmetry, just like a mess of cotton. These cognitions were played out in Li Ming's mind in the form of pictures, and the Canis Major galaxy was also constantly rotating in Li Ming's mind. There is no doubt that this is a galaxy with scarce resources and extremely scarce energy, but it cannot be ruled out that there are advanced civilization creatures in it. After exploring and contacting it, Dali actually started a transaction with the other party. The Canis Major dwarf galaxy is a large galaxy as regular as the Milky Way, not a small star system like the solar system. One of the planets called Dominic is the location of this advanced civilization. Dominic is located in a small star system called Domingo, and the transaction with Dali is also very simple. The Dominicans provide Dali with cutting-edge technology of scientific and technological civilization, and Dali provides Dominic with information data about the Milky Way, including security coordinates, galaxy civilization, resource distribution, etc. It is under the technology of this advanced civilization that Dali has his current status and strength. When recalling this information, there are some things that Li Ming cannot know. Among them, Li Ming does not know which coordinates and galaxy civilizations Dali provided to the Dominicans, but it is rare to get benefits from advanced civilizations. However, it is obvious that this is also taking a great risk, because according to Dali's communication with the other party, this Dominican star is planning to enter the Milky Way. With his eyes open, Li Ming sighed slightly. This kind of thing is also weird, because it is rare for advanced civilizations to contact low-level civilizations, let alone provide technology, because in the vast universe, the energy of galaxies and the survival of their own species face many challenges. Whether it is advanced civilization or low-level civilization, they are exploring the universe with only one purpose: to find precious energy and resources. If a low-level civilization has rare resources and does not have the ability to develop them, it will be devastating once it is discovered by an advanced civilization. Unable to figure out the relationship between Dali and the Dominicans, and not having discovered this kind of information from Dali's mind before, Li Ming could only put it aside for now. Just as Li Ming was about to do something else, the metal door in front of him suddenly flashed. Li Ming raised his eyes slightly, looked at it, and then stretched out his right hand and pointed it at the metal door. Green light shot out, and the surface of the metal door was streaked with light, and it disappeared. Walker slowly walked in from behind the empty door. Walker did not make any extra moves. After entering the room, he threw a star bag on the ground with a flick of his mouth, and then turned and left. The metal door then closed and returned to its physical state, and Li Ming looked at the star bag on the ground and grabbed the star bag in his hand with his right hand. After a slight sense, he smiled slightly. This Dali is really impatient. He sent so many materials right away. As he spoke, Li Ming clenched his right hand and put away the star bag. After sighing, he said to himself, well, it's not a bad thing to accumulate some nebula pills. Li Ming knew very well that refining pills now would be a sure win for Li Ming, because when Li Ming told Dali about it, the success rate of refining pills was only 30% to 40%, but in fact, Li Ming's ability was 100% successful. For every 10 pills refined, Li Ming would take 6 or 7, and after the rest were traded for other resources, Li Ming could still get half of the share, which was indeed very cost effective. Of course, in addition to refining nebula pills, Li Ming's secret barrier pills also needed to be refined. He had already purchased enough materials on the trading ship before, and the rest was just a matter of refining and time. In addition, Li Ming had to recultivate the 4 major star classes of the Selras people: Magic Shield, Magic, and Magic Casting. With Dali as his bodyguard, Li Ming was absolutely relieved. Besides these, Li Ming had just figured out some details about the artifact on his body, so he had to spend more time to learn more about it. Many things needed to be completed by Li Ming little by little. Li Ming would not leave this place in a short time. Of course, when doing these things, Li Ming quietly released the flying dragon. This third eye was very important. Li Ming began to practice alchemy and cultivation. Walker was waiting outside quietly, but Moore could not stay idle for a moment, and kept playing with the instruments of technological civilization. Weifeng number 3 could be said to have become Li Ming's home. As time went by, the outside world was also undergoing tremendous changes. A large area of Bidit star was controlled by Hender and Hart's troops, and the other major galaxies were opposed to it. The war between the two sides continued, but Hender and Hart still had an absolute advantage and had established a war headquarters on land. There were spaceships flying in the sky, and patrolling robots could be seen on the ground at any time. Every time a region was controlled, a large number of troops were stationed. On the surface, it seemed that controlling the planet Bidit was only a matter of time. The ground headquarters was located in the 5 huge buildings where the camp was assembled earlier. In one of the spherical buildings, a large number of aliens were busy. The house was hundreds of meters long and wide, like a square. In the middle of the house was an operating table 5 or 6 meters long and wide. Hendricks and Hatfield were discussing around the operating table. The operating table showed the current situation of the war. On the map woven by light, red represented their own troops and blue represented hostile forces. Large areas of camps and building areas were basically under control of the red area, but there was a small blue area embedded in the red control area like a nail, which was not only eye-catching but also uncomfortable. After Hendricks stared at the blue area for a while, his right hand suddenly pointed at it, and the light flashed. The blue area suddenly became larger and brighter on the operating table, and the structure and building layout in the area were also clearly presented. This is Dali's camp. Hendricks still looked angry when he mentioned Dali. Hatfield's eyes were naturally fixed on that place. After looking at it for a few more times, his eyes suddenly returned to Hendricks and said, Dali is indeed difficult to deal with, but this is not in our plan, so don't worry too much. Hendricks glanced at Hatfield, gritted his teeth angrily, and didn't say much, but his eyes were fixed on that area, and his eyes were full of unwillingness. Hatfield naturally saw through the other party's thoughts, and said again, the goal of this war has basically been achieved. Although the 3 joint teams have come to Bidit Star, under the high pressure of our troops, they have no possibility of leaving Bidit Star. Adriana will soon arrive at Bidit Star. By that time, our mission will be completed. The rest will be solved by Adriana. Hatfield continued, took a deep breath, took a few steps forward to Hendricks' side, and said, brother, the 9th level people here will all die. Why are you still so indignant? Hendricks rolled his eyes and glanced at Hatfield. He didn't say anything, but the anger in his heart did not diminish. This anger naturally came from Li Ming and Ali. Chapter 255 Discussion. Hatfield chuckled twice and continued, on the surface, it seems that we have offended many galactic civilizations by launching an interstellar war, but from another perspective, this is not a bad thing. Because as long as Adriana comes, these people will disappear. Without these 9th level people, you and I will still have the final say in the outer system. A large amount of resources will still be in our hands. Hatfield said proudly. At this time, Hatfield had come to the front of the operating table, looking at Dali's camp on the operating table, and said, Hend, I'm somewhat interested in the guy with the chain demon you mentioned. Take out his information, so that I can let Hawk see it. Hendricks immediately laughed contemptuously and said, Hart, I have already given you the information about him before. Are you pretending not to know it now? Hatfield laughed ha ha ha, and nodded for a while. After that, he turned his eyes and looked at Kettle, who was not far away. Although he didn't say anything, Kettle immediately understood and raised his hand to point at the operating table. Blue light flashed and lines interlaced and woven in the air like a painting pen. After a few seconds, a human figure appeared on the operating table. This phantom figure woven by lines was Li Ming. Kettle then stepped forward and said, I have investigated all the information about this person. As he said this, various information appeared on the operating table in the form of alien characters. As this information slowly appeared, both Hart and Hend looked at it with great interest. There is not much detailed information about Li Ming. First of all, Li Ming's name, the origin of the galaxy is unknown, and the underlying civilization is unknown. The earliest information came from Enkinya Star. When he was an 8th level civilization, he could fight against 3 9th level civilizations alone without being defeated, and helped Enkinyali defeat the powerful enemy Tabitha Star. What is known is that Li Ming has an intelligent civilization. There is not much information, it is simple and clear, but Hendricks and Hatfield still read this simple information many times. The information Hendricks initially grasped was only Li Ming's appearance and the information of the joint team he joined, but after being sorted and discovered by Hatfield's men, Li Ming actually had such a layer of information. When he was at the 8th level, he could fight against 3 9th level people. Hendricks showed a questioning look, whispering in his mouth. His eyes were already looking at Hatfield, and after a light snort, he said, "Is this information accurate?" Hatfield did not reply, but turned back to look at Kettle. Kettle nodded affirmatively and replied, "The source of the information is provided by the Cruz Bay Information Station, and there is no problem with its accuracy." After getting this answer, Hendricks showed a surprised expression. His eyes returned to the operating table. His mouth did not say anything, but his mind secretly thought, when he was at the 8th level, he could fight against multiple 9th level people. Now he is at the 9th level. No wonder he is so powerful. Hatfield was also shocked by Li Ming's personal information, but his expression was still calm. After looking at Kettle again, he said, "According to Hawk's report to me, the chain demon was lost when they were fighting against the Tabitha Star people. Since this person has a chain demon, send his information to Hawk and let him take a look." "Yes." Kettle responded and turned away. But Hatfield looked at Li Ming's shadow, and there was an abnormal look between his eyebrows. In the blue area of the console, in a building in a camp, the leaders of many galaxy civilizations were talking to each other around a giant console. This was the control area of the joint team. At this time, there were as many as 25 9th level beings, but they were not from 25 galaxies, because most of them were 3 or 5 people in a galaxy, and they all had one goal: to enter the central system. The geographical pattern on the console was almost the same as that on Hatfield's side. A large area was controlled by red, but a small blue area surrounded by red areas attracted everyone's attention, which was also the purpose of everyone's discussion this time. Abel was the leader of the first joint team. After his eyes lightly touched this area, he said, "This is Dallas Camp, the safest place at present. If we continue to fight Hendricks and Hatfield like this, there will be no chance to leave Bidded Star. The purpose of our gathering here is for the central system, not for war, so I think we need to contact Dali and let him escort us out of Bidded Star." As Abel spoke, his eyes kept looking at the console. At this time, the scale and layout of Dallas Camp were presented on the console. Kyrus from the second joint team glanced at Abel and said angrily in a cold voice, "Abel, with our combined strength, it should be no problem to defeat Hendricks and Hatfield. Why do we need to ask Dali for help?" Dalton from the third team also nodded slightly and said, "I agree with Kyrus. Now we have 3 teams and 7 galaxy civilizations. There is no reason to be afraid of them." Abel rolled his eyes, glanced at the 2 of them, snorted softly, shook his head slightly, and said, "In terms of overall strength, we really have no need to be afraid, but it is so large, with far-reaching strategic depth. The most important thing is that there are clone alien troops in space. This interstellar war is not so easy to win. Even if we occupy the entire Biddit, what about space? Do we have to continue fighting? In that case, the war will not be able to end in a short time. By then, we will be deeply mired in war. What's the point of talking about joining the central system?" Abel's voice became louder and louder, and the anger in his heart was revealed little by little. After walking 2 steps around the console, he suddenly paused and continued, "Hendricks and Hatfield are both from the non-advanced 9th level civilization in the outer system. They launched a war on Biddit, which is undoubtedly to prevent us from entering the middle system. After all, they have no possibility of entering the first level civilization. This Biddit Star is short of resources, so what is the point of them occupying it? This, don't you understand?" After hearing what Abel said, Gillis's expression moved, and his originally tense expression relaxed. His slightly sunken eyes showed a thoughtful expression. Obviously, no matter what the result of the war is, it will be very disadvantageous to his side. Dalton smiled slightly and said, "Abel, don't forget that Dali is a businessman. Will the price we pay for asking him for help be less than the war?" Abel immediately replied, "This is not a question of price, but a question of our goal. Asking Dali for help can speed up our plan to enter the middle system, but war is an unknown." Dalton was startled when he heard this, and his eyes turned to Gillis. At this time, Kyrus took a deep breath, staring at the operating table without moving, and after hesitating for a while, he said, "Entering the central system is indeed our ultimate goal. Now that things have come to this, I have a win-win plan. Dalton stays in the camp to prepare for war and mobilize our spaceships and warships as much as possible, while Abel and I will go to Dallas camp together. If the conversation goes well, we will do what Abel said before. If the conversation fails, then we can only solve this matter by war." Kiris continued to speak, and this neutralization method made Abel and Dalton fall into silence. After a moment, Dalton took the lead in replying, "Okay, let's do it." Abel just smiled and nodded, and didn't say anything more. At this moment, a burst of joyful laughter continued to emanate from Weifeng number 3 in Dallas camp. Moore was sitting on a small aircraft flying around in the main cabin of the building, saying, "Whoa, this is really great, Walker, why don't you try it?" A 1-meter long aircraft was flying around in the cabin like a headless fly. Along with Moore's excited voice, the silver aircraft kept flying around. Walker lay on the ground motionless, looking at the other person with his eyes, and his eyes sometimes followed the movement of the aircraft. Bang! A muffled sound suddenly sounded, and Walker glanced at it, and slowly closed his eyes. Moore's scream stopped abruptly, and the aircraft actually crashed into the cabin wall. Chapter 256 Moore is captured. "Oh, damn," Moore shouted. Although the aircraft hit the wall, it was not completely damaged. It just twisted and deformed, and fell to the ground. Moore shook his head slightly. The collision just now made him a little dizzy. "The space here is still too small," Moore said, struggling to get out of the aircraft, but one of his chicken claws was squeezed into a gap by the deformed metal, and could not be pulled out. "This is really a major flight accident." Moore continued to talk to himself, and put more force on his legs, but he couldn't pull his legs out, after trying several times. After struggling in vain, Moore collapsed on the aircraft panting, and his eyes turned slightly, to look at Walker lying in the distance. "Hey, buddy, I need help," he shouted, waving his wings, as if waving. Walker's body did not move at all. After opening his eyes a little to look at Moore, he slowly closed them again. Seeing that the other party was indifferent, Moore couldn't help but get a little annoyed and continued to shout, "You bald cat, didn't you hear me? If I hadn't been talking to you just now, how could I have bumped into you? I have tolerated you for a long time. If it weren't for my leg." Moore was shouting, and his leg was pulled out of the gap at this time. His eyes, which were originally wide and round, suddenly paused, and his head slowly turned back to look at his pulled out leg. But at this time, Walker also slowly stood up, staring at Moore with his eyes, and walked towards this side with light steps. The seemingly calm Walker now had a fierce expression. When Moore saw Walker coming, he was worried and at a loss. He spread his wings helplessly and said hesitantly, "Sometimes we must learn to control our emotions. Yes, this will avoid a lot of trouble." So, as he spoke, Moore suddenly flapped his wings and flew away. Watching Moore fly away, Walker's footsteps also stopped. After looking at Moore for a few more times, he turned around and walked back to his original place. Moore flew in the air and headed for the portal. In a flash, he disappeared in the portal. With a flash of light, Moore came out of the portal and arrived at the door outside Weifeng number 3. His wings kept flapping, and he came to the middle of the road. As far as the eye could see were all kinds of huge buildings of Delhi camp. Moore closed his eyes slightly, took a deep breath through his nostrils, and whispered, "The air outside is full of the smell of freedom. This feeling is simply, ah." Moore, who was talking, suddenly felt his throat tighten. He couldn't make any sound, and even couldn't breathe. His throat was tightly grasped by a big hand. Grabbing Moore's neck, it was like holding a chicken. The arm was raised and placed in front of his eyes. He looked at Moore with his eyes, and snorted with disdain. "Is this a creature from this planet?" A tall and fat alien looked at Moore and whispered. At this time, 3 aliens not far away looked over here. These 3 people were Abel and Bullet from the first team, and Kiris from the second team. Among them, Kiris glanced at him with contempt and said, "Donis, throw him away. He might be Dallas' pet." The tall Donis said nothing more. He waved his right hand casually and threw Moore out like throwing away garbage. Swoosh, pa. Moore's body flew out directly and fell heavily on the wall of Weifeng number 3 building in the distance. At this time, Moore opened his eyes wide, stuck out his tongue, and slid to the ground along the wall. Donis turned around and returned to Kira's side. Abel raised his right hand, and a blue instrument glowed in his palm. Rays of light shot out from it, and soon Dally's face appeared in the blue light. "Dally, we are here." Looking at the shadow of Dally in the blue light, Abel said. The blue light flickered slightly. Dally smiled. His expression was very strange, and replied, "Very good. The new positioning instructions will be transmitted soon. Come to me according to the route." After saying this, the phantom in the blue light disappeared automatically, and a map of the camp building appeared again, with a blue dot flashing continuously. Abel looked at the flashing point and said, "Let's go." Here. Looking at the map, Abel took the lead and continued to move forward along the road, and the others followed quickly. However, just after these people took a few steps, a red light flashed, and Moore's figure reappeared in front of them. At this time, Moore was grinning and full of anger. Just when he was about to do something, a big hand suddenly stretched out and grabbed Moore's neck again. It was still Donis. Abel was not in the mood to care about this at the moment. He just paused for a moment and continued to move forward. Donis's other hand slowly extended, and a grey line stretched out from his palm, like a small snake. After a while of twisting and winding, Moore's body was tied up like a dumpling, unable to move at all. After doing this, Donis threw Moore on his shoulder and continued to follow the people in front. This action was seen by Gillis, who said without turning his head, "Donis." Before Gillis finished speaking, Donis smiled and said, "This may be a good pet. If it belongs to Dally, I want to buy it." Gillis turned his eyes back to the road ahead and ignored him. The four of them continued to move forward. However, Moore's chicken mouth was also tightly wrapped, and he could only make a dull sound, unable to say a word. Looking at Weifeng number 3 that was getting farther and farther away, Moore actually showed a look of regret. At this time in the assembly camp, Hatfield stood angrily in front of a small operating table, his eyes trembling constantly. This operating table is not the large operating table in the main cabin, but a small operating table in a separate closed room. It can be said that this is an internal device of Hatfield's forces. His lips twitched slightly, and his teeth appeared from time to time. On the operating table was Hawk's shadow, but Hawk's head was slightly lowered at this time, like a child who had made a mistake, and he didn't say a word. "Hawk, such a big thing, you actually concealed it from me, ignoring that I usually treat you like my own brother. You really disappoint me," Hatfield said slowly, but every word revealed the anger in his heart. Hawk raised his head again, with a tense expression, and said after a while, "King Hart, give me another chance. I will definitely catch this man, and take back the chain demon and let him." Hatfield just stared at him for a long time without responding. After calming down, he said, "No, I will handle this matter myself now. Stay in space, and pay attention to the actions of the joint team. This is your current task." Hawk's complex expression kept changing. At this time, he was so eager to have another chance to wash away the shame, but facing Hatfield's order, he could only show helplessness, lowered his head slightly, and slowly replied, "Yes." Hatfield then waved the scepter in his hand, and the connection was directly disconnected. After hesitating for a while, he turned around and quickly left the room. Passing through the portal, Hatfield hurried to the main cabin. In front of the giant operating table, Hendricks continued to stand still. Seeing Hatfield coming back, Hendricks had noticed the change in his expression, but he didn't say a word. Hatfield extended his right scepter, reopened the map of Dally's camp, checked it, and said, "I think we should talk to Dally." Hatfield's sudden strategic change surprised Hend. With a cold expression, he slowly said, "I'm afraid it's too late. We just got the news that the joint team has begun negotiations with Dally." Hearing this, Hart's eyes showed surprise. Looking at Dally's camp, Hatfield's complex expression was full of anger. However, at this moment, the huge operating table suddenly flashed a few times, and all the map information disappeared. The blue light spun and gathered like a meteor and woven into a figure. It was Adriana. When they saw this figure, everyone's face changed, showing respect, and bowed slightly. Adriana looked at Hendricks and Hatfield with contempt and said, "You did a good job. Next, let me handle it." If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 257, Negotiation Failure. Near the outer space of Bidit, a medium-sized circular spaceship has slowly approached. In the main cabin of the spaceship, Adriana looked at the control panel coldly. The screen on the control panel is Hendricks and Hatfield. "This cleanup operation has begun. You can leave here." Adriana's hard mechanical voice makes people tremble. Hatfield and Hendricks dare not say more. Although they look unwilling, they hesitated for a while and lowered their heads slightly after this order. After giving the order, Adriana pointed at the control panel. The control panel, like the surface of water, was rippled. The screen of Hendricks and Hatfield disappeared directly in the water ripples, and the planet Bidit reappeared. The light spots flashed, and the planet Bidit continued to expand. The coordinates of a region gradually appeared. After confirming the coordinates, Adriana suddenly showed a sinister smile at the corner of her mouth. In the Dali camp on Bidit, 4 9th level civilizations walked out of the portal and came to a reception room. At this time, Dali sat quietly in front of a meteorite table. The 4 people who came in were Abel, Kiris and others. Seeing the 4 people coming in, Dali did not move, but just smiled. Kiris and Abel quickly came to the table and sat down, while Britt and Donna stood behind them. Dali glanced at the few people and said, "At this special moment, your coming is not a good thing for me. Let's talk about the transaction directly." Abel stared at him with a very serious expression and said, "You are responsible for sending us to the space of Bidit Star and ensuring our successful transmission. As for the reward, you can ask for it." Dali's expression showed a strange color, but he soon smiled and said, "It sounds like a good deal, but the risk is too great, so you should know that this will cost you a huge price." Abel frowned slightly and glanced at Kiris beside him. After the two looked at each other, they didn't say much. Dali continued, "If I escort you away like this, then Hendricks and Hatfield's troops will turn all their spearheads against me. You should know that I'm a businessman. I don't want war, so I may also leave Bidit. You know, I have been operating on Bidit for many years. Now let me give up this business like this. What price will it cost? Can you bring out something that will impress me?" Dali's tone was a little light, but the content of his words was extremely serious. Gillis's eyes suddenly showed a fierce look, and he said coldly, "You mean to refuse?" "No, if I refuse, I will never allow you to come to my camp, so I think you should be able to come up with, or at least have the chips, that can make me agree to this deal." Dali answered very seriously, and his flashing eyes seemed to be full of expectations for the 2 people in front of him. But Abel looked troubled. He knew the businessman in front of him very well. Ordinary things could not impress the other party. Only extremely rare and precious items could do it. While thinking, Abel's eyes turned to Kiris. After hesitating for a moment, he suddenly raised his hand, and a small piece of mutant crystal appeared in Abel's hand. The mutant crystal, the size of a fingertip, shone in Abel's palm. There was no doubt that the mutant crystal was definitely a precious and rare thing. Dali suddenly sat up a little straighter. It was obvious that the mutant crystal was still attractive, but when he saw the size, Dali shook his head slightly and said, "Mutated crystals are indeed good things, but if there is only this one, it is still not enough." Abel clenched his palm and put away the mutant crystal. At the same time, his right hand opened again, and the original instrument had appeared. Blue light flashed, and pieces of information were displayed. This information was exactly various resource materials, like a list. Dali's eyes stopped on the blue light, and he looked at the things on it carefully. After a moment, Dali still shook his head in disappointment and said, "If this is a bargaining chip for your transaction, it is still too little." Abel paused after hearing this, and Gillis next to him stood up angrily, looking at Dali fiercely, and said, "Then the transaction ends here." After such an angry shout, Gillis turned around and prepared to leave. Abel also showed a helpless expression at this moment. He clenched his palms and stood up. He turned around and looked at Bullet beside him and whispered, "Let's go." The four turned around and actually walked towards the portal. However, when the four were about to reach the portal, Dallas' eyes suddenly saw something and stood up and said, "Stop." The four stopped one after another after hearing the voice. Abel turned his face back and smiled slightly. Just when he was about to say something, he saw Dallas' eyes staring straight at Donis. "Where did you catch that wild beast?" Dally said dissatisfiedly. This sentence also made the other three people look at Donis. Donis looked at Dally with a cold look and said, "It's my pet now, shorty." Donis showed no mercy. The failure of the trade negotiation made him furious. Dally was originally short, but no one dared to bump into him like this. However, Dally didn't care too much. Instead, he said seriously, "That pet belongs to my friend. I advise you to return it to where you caught it. Otherwise, you will suffer." Donis tilted his head slightly, laughed, and said, "Can it be worse than this failed transaction? I'm not worried at all." As he said this, Donis turned and walked out. The other three also prepared to leave with disdain. The failure of the negotiation meant the start of a war. Dally could not provide help, and the 7 galaxies of the joint team would have to prepare for a larger scale interstellar war. The light flashed, and the 4 people returned to the outside and walked along the road in the middle of the building towards the direction of the spacecraft. Gillis looked a little unhappy and said, "The materials in the list are almost all the resources of the 7 galaxy civilizations of our 3 teams, and Ali is still not satisfied." Abel, however, had a different expression on his face and said as he walked, "Compared to a large amount of resources, what Dally wants should be rare materials like the mutant crystals. But these kinds of things are hard to come by, and now that things have come to this, we may really have to rely on war to solve this problem." Abel still said unwillingly, and Gillis on the side did not reply, and the 4 continued to move forward. At the end of the road, there was a medium-sized spaceship, which was the spaceship that the 4 people drove when they came here, but from a distance, they could already see a figure standing in front of the spaceship. The appearance of this person made the 4 people look confused. From the appearance, this person was not Dallas' subordinate, but the appearance was also a race that Gillis had never seen before. As they got closer, the face and body shape gradually became clear. Standing in front of the spaceship was Li Ming, and there was a black and grey kitten, Walker, lying on Li Ming's shoulder. As soon as he saw Li Ming, Abel's head buzzed, as if something had hit him. He froze in his tracks, his face dull and his eyes wide open. Not only Abel, but Bullet beside him even took a step back and uttered with a trembling mouth, This, it's him." Abel and Bullet's performance was seen by Gillis and Donis. They then slowly stopped, looked at Abel in confusion, and then turned to look at Li Ming. Donis continued to move forward 2 steps, his huge figure like a small mountain, looking at Li Ming coldly, and said, "I'm not in a good mood now. Get out of here, before I get angry." Li Ming stood calmly in the same place without moving, and didn't say a word. But when Donis said this, Abel and Bullet became even more terrified. They looked at Donis with wide eyes, as if to say, "Damn, how dare you talk to him like that?" Exclamation mark. After all, the person who spoke to Li Ming like this last time was a guy from the Abel United team, but this person has disappeared forever and was swallowed by Li Ming's chain demon. Chapter 258 Species Mutation. Meh, who was hanging on Donis's back, suddenly sensed something and swung his body wildly. Because his body was bound, he could only twist and turn and sway left and right. The wild shaking of his body made Mer's head appear from Donis' side. A series of sounds came continuously, just like the sound of someone's mouth being sealed with tape. Li Ming didn't need to look to know that it was Mer, because when Li Ming was refining the elixir, Long had seen everything on his behalf, but Li Ming was in the critical period of refining the elixir at that time, and couldn't act immediately. Donis's eyes turned at this moment, his eyebrows raised, and he looked at Li Ming with no patience. Without waiting for Donis to do anything, Abel seemed a little anxious, and hurriedly stepped forward and bowed, saying that, we. Before Abel finished speaking, Li Ming interrupted him and said, "Let More go first." Abel was stunned when he heard this, and his eyes rolled in his eye sockets, and looked at Donis's back. He did not dare to pause at all, and stepped forward to rescue More. However, Before he could do anything, Donna suddenly turned around and looked at Abel. Abel, what are you going to do? Donis looked at Abel with strange eyes, and there was a bit of confusion in his eyes. Of course, seeing Abel bowing to Li Ming did confuse him. As a 9th level civilization, he had never been so afraid, even when he encountered a non-advanced civilization like Hendrix. Bullet yelled angrily, Donis, are you going to die? Give it back. Gillis, who was standing by, suddenly stretched out his hand and blocked Abel and Bullet, saying, what's wrong with you? Humph. As the four of them were arguing, Li Ming, who was far away, had narrowed his eyes slightly and suddenly stretched out his right hand towards the four of them while grabbing them with his palm. Bang! A muffled sound was heard, and Donis's body tightened, as if it was tightly grasped by a big hand, unable to move at all. As soon as this happened, Gillis's eyes immediately looked at Li Ming, and he raised his hand in surprise and was about to use some ability, but before he could make a move, the other party's body also tightened and could not move. Seeing this scene, Abel and Bullet immediately retreated to a distance, and the two looked at each other and did not dare to make any rash moves. Li Ming's right hand slowly dropped. At this time, a grey light curtained vortex slowly formed under the feet of Kiris and Donis, just like a round door suddenly opened. This familiar scene made Abel and Brit pale and terrified. Kiris and Donis wanted to struggle, but their bodies could not move. What is this? Kiris' head slowly lowered and looked at the black vortex under his feet. Li Ming walked over slowly and came to Donis' side with light steps. Looking at Li Ming again, Donis' body was completely tense and trembling slightly. Although he was full of fear of Li Ming's ability, he was also full of anger in his heart. Li Ming calmly glanced at the other party and reached out to touch more behind him, but at this moment, Donis suddenly roared. Ah! The sound was like the roar of a wild beast. As soon as the sound came out, a black tumor suddenly appeared on Donis's body, as if something was about to drill out of his body. Li Ming frowned upon seeing this, and immediately retracted his hand, that was stretched out to more, and jumped back into the air. The next moment, the tumor on Donis's body grew rapidly, and black tentacles grew out one after another, like a black octopus. In the blink of an eye, Donis had turned into a black giant monster more than 10 meters tall. The head and body of the other party could not be seen, only a dozen fleshy tentacles were constantly swaying. At this time, a small aircraft flew in the sky not far from Dally's camp, and Dally sat in the aircraft, looking at everything below, whispering, rare species mutation ability in biological civilization. Dalton, who was standing next to Dally, also stared at the scene and said, should we do it? After all, the alchemist is still below. Dally's mouth corners slightly raised, and said, no, I know our alchemist very well. I have already investigated all the data and information related to him. This alchemist named Li Ming is not ordinary. Data detection shows that his 9th level combat power is far higher than that of ordinary 9th level civilizations, so we don't have to worry. Dally looked at the screen confidently and continued to say, there are many unknown secrets in him, but I need time to understand him. While Dally was speaking, the situation below had changed. Abel and Bullet had retreated to a distance, but Kiris was still pulled by the grey vortex under his feet. Although Donis had already mutated, his bottom was still a grey vortex. The ability of the Chain Demon is not something that anyone can get rid of easily. This new ability of biological civilization is also something that Li Ming has never seen before. He is not afraid at all, but rather has some interest. With his discerning eyes, Li Ming has already known the information about the other party's ability. This is exactly a branch of ability in the biological civilization system, species mutation. The biological civilization that Li Ming has come into contact with does not have this ability, so it is new and strange. More than a dozen tentacles swayed around, and it seemed that only the bottom was controlled by the gravity of the vortex, while the tentacles were not affected. Kiris on the side began to move, as if he wanted to take this opportunity to break free from the shackles of the grey vortex. While struggling, he said, Donis, hurry up. Hearing what Kiris said, Donis's shaking tentacles seemed to have found their direction and flew towards Li Ming. Li Ming stood still, seemingly not worried about the other party's attack. With a whoosh sound, the tentacles stretched out to Li Ming like arms, but they suddenly stopped not far away, as if they were forcibly pulled by some force. Under this force, the tentacles could not move forward any further. Not only that, the tentacles that had already stretched out were being slowly pulled back by the force. At this time, Kyrus suddenly stopped resisting and looked intently. His arms and waist were bound by chains. All of Donis's dozen tentacles were connected to a black chain. Each chain came from the grey vortex at the bottom of his feet, and these chains were still shrinking a little bit. This scene was no longer unfamiliar. Abel whispered in horror, "It's this again. Even Hendrix can't resist this trick." The pulling of the chain, coupled with the gravity of the vortex, the bound people were falling down little by little, and the vortex was like a bottomless swamp that could swallow everything. Li Ming watched quietly, glanced at his left shoulder, and said, "Go, Walker." As soon as the voice fell, Walker's bright eyes suddenly opened, and his figure shot out like a grey light, and he came to Donis in a flash. Although the tentacles had been pulled down by the chains, they were still twisting. Walker's body jumped back and forth on these squirming bodies, and after a few jumps, he came to the back of the bottom. This was Donis's leg, but now there was only a tumor left, and more was hanging here, swaying like a pendulum following Donis's shaking body. As soon as he saw Walker, Moore's excited eyes kept blinking, and he made a sound of "m," as if saying, "Save me." Walker narrowed his eyes slightly, and waved his front paws. A silver light flashed, as if a sharp blade had slashed through. There were only a few swoosh sounds, and the silver blade light danced in front of his eyes, and the lines that were wrapped around Moore were all broken. As soon as Moore's body was untied, he fell to the ground. At this time, the grey light flashed again, and Walker bit more with his mouth. His body bounced for a while, and after a few flashes, he returned to the ground in front of Li Ming. He opened his mouth and spit more on the ground. Moore was excited to regain his freedom. He looked at his legs and his plump wings, but soon turned around and looked at Donis, who had turned into a monster. He seemed to be going back to fight Donis, but before he took a step, Walker stretched out his front paws to block him and said, "I won't save you a second time." Moore glanced at Walker and shouted, "Who saved you?" "With my strength." He was halfway through his words when a tumor suddenly grew on one of Donis's thick tentacles, and then another tentacle stretched out to this side. Chapter 259 Adriana arrives. Tentacles grew out again, just like branches spreading out, and continued to grow. Two silver lights flashed by, and the tentacles that stretched out were broken into pieces, as if they were cut into several pieces by a sharp blade. Walker stood in front of the oncoming tentacles. This infinite growth mode was really surprising. Li Ming couldn't help but stare blankly at it, and even had some interest in this ability in his heart. Although he was watching, Li Ming didn't want to get entangled with the other party like this. He raised his right hand slightly, and the palm of his hand was surrounded by black light, like a ball of black mist. The 5 fingers suddenly exerted force, and the black group tightened. Looking at the distance again, the chains immediately accelerated the speed of pulling downwards. At this time, the scene made Li Ming feel a little nervous. The tentacles bound by the chains were being dragged into the vortex, but new tentacles began to grow on these bound tentacles again. In other words, it was like a big tree. The trunk had been swallowed, but the branches on it were still growing rapidly. It gave people an endless and continuous growth. Moore was completely stunned. His impulsive expression disappeared at once. The tentacle that stretched out in front of him was also pulled away little by little. However, the tumor was still growing on the tentacle, but the speed was much slower than before. Looking at the tumors that were still growing, Moore stepped back little by little until he came to Li Ming's feet. He couldn't help but hug Li Ming tightly with a pair of wings. Li Ming was quite calm. After a light hum, he suddenly waved his right hand, and Donis's body fell even faster. Even the tentacles that had just grown could not escape, just like an octopus being quickly collected into a bottle. After a few seconds, the monster with bared fangs and claws had disappeared, completely swallowed by the black vortex, and the body of Kyrus next to him was submerged to the waist. However, seeing his teammates disappear like this, Kyrus's face was a little pale, and his eyes were full of fear. Li Ming's eyes turned, and he glanced at Kyrus. He then waved his right hand, and the black vortex began to fade and disappear little by little. The chains that entangled Kiris also gradually disappeared. When the vortex completely disappeared, Kiris's body also returned to normal. He looked down at his lower body that had just been swallowed, and it was safe and sound. He was relieved, but when he looked at the place beside him, there was no trace of Donis. What was more terrifying was that there seemed to be no one around him. Retracting his ability, Li Ming left quickly and ran towards his own Weifeng number 3. Seeing Li Ming walking past him, Kiris couldn't help trembling, and beads of sweat the size of beans flowed down his forehead. Abel and Bullet in the distance behind him were even more like this. They stood there and dared not move. It was not until Li Ming walked away that Abel breathed a sigh of relief and whispered sharply, "Go quickly." As he said this, he hurriedly walked towards the spaceship. Kiris didn't dare to stay for a moment, and he moved and followed quickly. But just when Abel and the others came to the side of the spaceship, a small spaceship slowly came to the low altitude in the sky and landed in front of the 3 people. Abel and Kiris looked at the spaceship in front of them with panic, not knowing why, trembling, afraid of another trouble. The hatch of the small spaceship opened, and Ali floated out of it. His figure swayed and came to the front of the 3 people. He smiled and said, "I just thought about it carefully and decided to agree to your transaction plan. After you go back, you can bring everything on your list. I will arrange to escort you away from Badit Star." As soon as Dali finished speaking, he was about to turn around and leave, but he suddenly stopped at the moment of turning around, looked at Abel, and said, "By the way, don't forget to bring the mutant crystal." After this sentence was explained, Dali smiled and returned to the small spaceship. The hatch of the spaceship closed quickly, and silver light flashed, and the spaceship had already left. Abel was still in a daze, feeling like he was dreaming. He was panicking and wanted to leave the place as soon as possible, but before he left, he heard what Dali said, and he didn't know whether he should be happy or sad. Gillis was also in a daze. Everything changed so fast that he couldn't keep up with his mood. "Let's go, leave here first," Abel said first, and walked towards his spaceship. The 3 of them left Dali's camp quickly on the spaceship, but at this moment, the area controlled by Hendricks and Hatfield was also changing. A large number of troops were shrinking, both on the ground and in the air, and began to evacuate to the mothership. Because the controlled area was too large, even evacuation would take a lot of time. Before evacuating all the troops in the controlled area, the first thing to do was to withdraw the main high-level personnel back to the mothership. The assembly camp was already preparing for the evacuation of the troops, and a large number of robots and small spaceships in the air began to shuttle back and forth. Hendricks watched all this in front of the giant operating table, with an unwilling look in his eyes. Dali's camp had always been a place that he was worried about. After Hartfield got Li Ming's personal information, his mind was all on the Dali camp. And, although Adriana is here, I think we just need to retreat to space. After Adriana's killing is over, we can clean up the battlefield. Heartseye seemed to have his own plans. As he spoke, his eyes kept switching back and forth between the Dali camp and Hendricks. Hendricks hesitated for a moment, but soon understood what Hart meant. After nodding slightly, he said, "Okay, cleaning up the battlefield and reorganizing the Badit Star is indeed very important." The 2 hit it off and smiled strangely. There was a sudden thunder and lightning in the sky above a construction area on Badit Star, and the light was flowing. Suddenly, a sphere appeared in the lightning and the empty sky. The sphere was transparent, as if a transparent water droplet suddenly appeared in the air, and there was a constant flash of lightning around the water droplet, dazzling. This strange celestial phenomenon immediately attracted the attention of the aliens on the ground. The residents walked out of the building and looked up at the sky. Those who were outside the building also stopped, as if they had forgotten what they were doing, and their minds were all attracted by the strange phenomenon in the sky. The transparent water droplets seemed to be squeezed in from space, making their existence very abrupt. A person slowly walked out of the top window of a tall building in the construction area. This person stood on the balcony outside the window and stared at the sky. He was the highest leader of this construction area with a 9th level civilization. After a few seconds, the transparent water droplets disappeared, replaced by a medium-sized round-shaped spaceship. The entire spaceship was silver, shining and particularly bright, which also made the people below talk about it. At this time, a small hatch was opened on the top of the spaceship, and then a figure with a silver body and a long sword on his back slowly rose from the spaceship. As soon as the figure appeared, a pair of empty black eyes scanned the construction area below. Just a rough look, all the aliens were taken into her eyes. But when her head turned to the tallest building, it suddenly stopped. On the balcony at the top of the building, a 9th level alien caught her attention. His eyes moved slightly, and his body suddenly turned into a line, and disappeared on the spot. As soon as her figure disappeared, the aliens who noticed her made surprised sounds, either looking at each other, or whispering to themselves. The 9th level civilization who also saw this scene was stunned and suddenly shuddered. Zzzz, a sharp electric current sound sounded in his ears, and silver vertical strips of light flashed beside this 9th level. In less than 2 seconds, a figure had emerged. It was the person on the top of the spaceship just now, Adriana. At this time, this 9th level civilization had not yet noticed the other party's existence, even though the other party was right next to him, and his eyes were still looking at the spaceship in the distance. Anna's eyes were also looking at the spaceship in the distance. She slowly stretched out her right hand and lightly touched the spaceship. The silver spaceship made a clang sound and disappeared out of thin air. However, in less than a second, the spaceship made a clang sound and appeared not far away in front of her. The alien from the 9th level civilization couldn't help but tremble and was frightened. Chapter 260 The Secret Under the Memory Barrier. The stiff head turned sideways a little bit, and the neck at this time seemed to be a mechanical gear, and turned to her side a little bit. She saw the silver alien with a long sword on his back next to her. The eyes of this 9th level alien were wide open, and his face was as stiff as ice, expressionless and pale. Anna looked at the spaceship in front of her, without even looking at the other party. She naturally stretched out her right hand to the other party, and the 5 fingers of the palm were open, grabbing his face. Puff, I only saw a silver big hand reaching out to my face, and before I could react, I lost consciousness. The big hand did not really grab the other party's face, but stayed a few centimeters away from his face. Circles of transparent ripples spread out from the palm of the hand. The powerful energy made the whole building tremble slightly, but Anna's calm posture seemed to have done nothing. Bang, there was another muffled sound, and the 9th level alien shattered directly, like a suddenly broken mirror scattered all over the floor. Anna took her hand back without even looking at the other person. Killing a 9th order civilization was like crushing an ant. Her body twisted, and turned into a line again, and disappeared on the spot. At this moment, in the camp of the joint team, a giant spaceship was rising to the sky, and in the main cabin of the spaceship, many 9th order civilizations were talking. The captains of the 3 joint teams were also speaking, and the communication was extremely intense. Gillis pointed to the operating table in front of him and said, whether Hendricks and Hatfield really want to retreat or not, our cooperation with Dali will not change. Dalton's eyes just glanced at the operating table and then looked at Abel. Abel smiled and said, now it's time for us to discuss what will happen after the teleportation to the critical point. After all, Dali has promised us that with his help, there will definitely be no accidents. Dalton seemed to have been waiting for this sentence, and nodded and looked at Gillis at the same time. Kiris paused for a moment, but soon said, our spaceship is a decomposition spaceship. Everyone will have their own independent spaceship. Once we reach the critical point, we will each take the decomposition ship to force our way into the central system. As for who can enter, it's up to fate. Abel nodded slightly without saying much, and turned his eyes to Dalton. Dalton hesitated for a moment and said, this plan was originally the plan for the early establishment of our joint team. There are not many changes. I have no objection. Abel hesitated after hearing this, and his expression was slightly tangled, as if he had something to hide. After hesitating for a moment, he said, what do you think about Li Ming? This person has always wanted to join our joint team, to enter the central system together, and now he is in Dali's camp. With so many of us, and such a big movement, it is impossible not to alarm him. Abel finally expressed his inner worries. When Li Ming was mentioned, Kiris was scared. After all, he had experienced Li Ming's strength. Now after hearing what Abel said, he was even more frightened. Although Dalton had never seen Li Ming, he knew about Li Ming's power from the description of the two. Without waiting for Chris to speak, Dalton said, since he has joined the joint team before, we should inform him first. After arriving at Dali camp, he can choose whether to go or not. Yes, yes, yes. Chris said with approval. We should tell him. Anyway, we still have a lot of idle decomposition spacecraft here, so we can choose one. The two said this, revealing their fear of Li Ming. Abel also sighed and said, I'm relieved that you can say this. After all, if he causes us any trouble, it will be devastating to us. After saying this, Chris and Dalton said no more, and could only acquiesce. In Dali camp, in a circular building, Li Ming and Ali were sitting opposite each other. On the meteorite table between them, a small box was open, and there were more than a dozen nebula pills inside, each of which was shining and full of energy. Dali looked at the pills with satisfaction and nodded slightly, saying, the top grade nebula pill is indeed extraordinary. Although it has only a 40% success rate, the quality is indeed good enough. Dali had already taken the box in his hand. Li Ming looked calm and didn't care, and didn't say a word. Dali raised his hand and put the box into the star bag, saying, when these pills are sold, I will give you half of the profit. Li Ming just smiled slightly and didn't care. Just as the two were talking, a rumbling sound came from outside. This sound was not an explosion, but like thunder in the sky. As the sound rang, Dali smiled slightly and said to himself, it seems that the business has come to the door. While speaking, Dali stood up from his seat, raised his hand, and pointed at the top of the room. A blue light shot out from his fingertips to the top. The blue light turned into thin blue silk threads like fireworks and spread out. Each line corresponds to an angle, just like cutting a watermelon to separate the top. After the blue light, the top really opened up like a bud. This also caused the original roof to slowly spread out, revealing the sky. Li Ming stood up from his seat after watching this operation. He didn't quite understand what Dali meant, but Li Ming's eyes were tightly squinted together, staring at Dali, and his sharp eyes wanted to see something. But just when Li Ming wanted to explore, he couldn't help but frowned and said to himself, what's going on? In the 9th level civilization, Li Ming's wisdom eyes can see through everything. Dali's mind does have many secrets, but there are also many memory barriers in Dali's mind. Simply put, Dali uses some special means to protect a certain memory point in his mind, so that spiritual civilization cannot easily explore. Generally speaking, Li Ming's wisdom eyes can passively see a lot of what he wants. Moreover, when the other party thinks about something in front of Li Ming, even if the matter has nothing to do with Li Ming, it will be passively presented. Just now, Dali was thinking about something, but under Li Ming's wisdom eyes, there was only a barrier. This was the first time Li Ming encountered such a situation, since he obtained spiritual civilization and wisdom eyes, and it was inevitable that he would feel weird. After Li Ming expanded the scope of exploration, he found that Dali's mind was like a maze. Li Ming's wisdom eyes hit the wall everywhere, and a large amount of content had memory barriers. These memory barriers are not impenetrable, but as long as Li Ming uses the active ability of wisdom eyes, he will be noticed by the other party. Li Ming's expression was a little solemn. He had no intention of using wisdom eyes to actively explore for the time being, so he could only wait and see what would happen next. After the entire top was opened, the room where Li Ming was now was more like a square. The tables, chairs and walls sank and disappeared into the ground, making the entire building a plane. Turning around and looking around, a huge spaceship in the distance caught Li Ming's attention. The spaceship was octagonal in shape, huge in size, and nearly 1,000 meters in diameter. Even in the distance, it blocked half of the sky. Below the spaceship, a group of figures flew over here. Li Ming recognized several of these aliens at once, including Abel, Chris, etc. Joint team? Li Ming said to himself. At this time, he was looking at Dali, and a message was displayed. The deal between Dali and the joint team was that Dali was responsible for sending these people to space and ensuring their safe transmission. Li Ming saw through this message at a glance and naturally understood it. However, behind this message, there was another hidden message related to the joint team and Li Ming, but there was a memory barrier, so Li Ming could not use passive perception. Dali thought about the news of the memory barrier before the top was about to open, and now it was the second time. I don't know what it is, but I can be sure of 2 points. First, it is related to Li Ming, and second, this matter is also very important to Dali. Li Ming took a deep breath, glanced at Dali with his eyes, and his mind was a little tangled, because Li Ming really wanted to know what kind of information it was. Chapter 261 Playing Dirty Tricks on Me? Li Ming hesitated, but the aliens had already flown close to him. He took a quick look and saw that there were more than 20 of them. After falling from the sky and landing directly on the platform, Dali greeted him with a smile and said, "I didn't expect you to arrive so punctually." The captains of the 3 leading joint teams also walked forward with a smile. Among them, Abel was the first to speak. "Time is tight. We have brought all the resources on the list. You should count them first." As he said this, Abel raised his hand and handed out a star capsule. Li Ming was a little surprised when he saw the star capsule, because this was the first time Li Ming saw other alien civilizations have such storage equipment. The star capsule is not a star bag. The capacity is far greater than that of the sky and the earth. Abel took out the star capsule, and it can be seen that there are many items in it. After all, the star capsule itself is a precious item. Dali smiled with satisfaction, reached out to take the star capsule, and at the same time, held up the star capsule with his hand, sensing the things inside with his consciousness. While sensing, Dali nodded from time to time, and sometimes made a sound. After a while, he finished the inspection, smiled with satisfaction again, and said, Nothing is missing." As he said this, Dali put away the star capsule, turned around and retreated to a distance. Dali's simple action seemed normal to others, but under Li Ming's wisdom eyes, he saw some clues, because Li Ming saw the thoughts hidden behind the action. The third time, Li Ming said secretly, "Indeed, the memory with the barrier just now emerged again," but Li Ming still had no idea what it was. In this case, only the wisdom eye can actively detect it, but it will definitely be noticed by the other party. Li Ming was full of entanglement. If it were normal, Li Ming might not care, but this matter has been showing that it is related to Li Ming. Whether it is good or bad, as long as it is related to him, Li Ming wants to know it first. Just when Li Ming was hesitating, a voice came from his mind. "What? How about I try?" More suddenly communicated with Li Ming with his consciousness. In a hurry, there seemed to be no other way, so Li Ming agreed secretly. At this time, Abel saw Dali put away the star capsule, and then said, "Since there is no problem with the things, if we enter the space, let's hurry up and start." Hehe. Dali chuckled twice, and waved his hand slightly, saying, don't worry, my little bear number 1 is not ready yet, I will urge them now." As he said so, Dali raised his hand, and an instrument appeared in his palm. Under the interweaving of blue light, Dali said sternly, "Dalton, little bear number 1 is ready." "Yes, King Dali." The reply came from the instrument soon. At this time, Li Ming, who was standing aside, saw all this. His face was a little ugly, and he whispered secretly, the 4th time. Moore's voice also rang in Li Ming's mind. "This is a first level memory barrier. If you want to explore without the other party knowing, you can't do it alone, and I can't do it alone, but if I cooperate with you, it may be possible." Cooperation? Li Ming was puzzled. Moore continued, "I will copy his mood and let him repeat his current feelings. You will force the exploration. Under repeated feelings, he will not notice your exploration, but time is limited, because too many repeated feelings will also be discovered." Li Ming hesitated when he heard this, but when he looked at Dali in front of him, he couldn't help but make up his mind and replied, "Okay." With a promise, the 2 of them activated their respective abilities. Li Ming and Moore had cooperated once before, that is, in the ruins of Io, and they were relatively tacit. With the previous experience, this time will naturally be much better. Li Ming and Moore began to explore, but Abel was a little anxious, and his eyes kept looking at Li Ming from time to time, but Li Ming's mind was not on him at all, which made Abel not know what to do. Turning his head, He looked at Gillis and Dalton and whispered, "Should we ask now, or wait a while?" Gillis also looked at Li Ming when he heard this, only to see Li Ming looking away, as if thinking about something, which made Gillis wonder if this was the right time. After the three of them had a quiet discussion, Abel suddenly said to Dali, "How long will it take for little bear number 1? Dali looked at the instrument in his hand again, and turned to look at the construction area in the distance. He saw several buildings slowly floating in the air and slowly assembling. Dali then smiled and said, "That's little bear number 1. It looks like it won't be long before it can go out." The shocking scene was staged again. The buildings that were originally on the ground turned into parts of the giant robot's body as soon as they floated into the air, just like a puzzle, with limbs and body assembled bit by bit. Abel and others were all attracted to it, looking at the formation of the robot from a distance. Some were amazed, and some were full of praise. After all, few technological civilizations in the outer system can achieve this ability. When everyone's eyes were attracted by this, Li Ming stared at Dali. Pieces of information gradually entered the brain, and more information began to be discovered by Li Ming. As these contents were revealed, Li Ming's face became more and more ugly. He looked at Dali fiercely, as if he was looking at a sinister villain. The contents that Li Ming had just obtained were indeed extraordinary. This Dali was not simply in contact with the Canis Major galaxy, but also with the advanced civilizations in the central system of the Milky Way. One of the actions about clearing and killing made Li Ming very angry. The clearing and killing action was a containment of the lower level civilizations by the advanced civilizations. Although the resources in the central system were rich, it was naturally best to be able to enjoy resources alone. The advanced civilizations in the central system were already rivals for each other, so how could they tolerate other civilizations to intervene? Therefore, at certain intervals, the advanced civilizations in the central system would send people down to wipe out all the low-level civilizations that attempted to enter the central system civilization to prevent trouble before it happened. There was such cooperation between Dali and the advanced civilizations. Dali provided the advanced civilizations in the central system with intelligence information on this aspect, and then waited for the right time to kill them together. Abel's joint team gathered here at this time, which was like a lamb to be slaughtered. Dali naturally had his own arrangements. As far as Li Ming was concerned, he was of great use to Dali, and could bring him rich benefits. Logically speaking, this should have been the reason for Li Ming to avoid being killed. However, Li Ming was powerful and far beyond Dali's control. Such a partner could not last long. If Li Ming really planned to leave, Dali could not stop him. Therefore, after Li Ming helped him refine certain elixirs, he would also include Li Ming in the list of killing. As for Abel and others, they were all on the killing list. In order to make these people more confident in believing in themselves, Dali first refused, and then agreed in the conversation with them about the transaction. Such a scheming acting really made Abel and others believe it, so they all gathered here. These were all Dali's inner plans. Of course, according to the detailed information of this plan, a killing person named Adriana was about to arrive here. Dali not only got benefits from Li Ming, but also extorted money from the joint team of the 7 galaxies of Abel, just waiting for Adriana to come and kill these people. Seeing these contents, Li Ming opened his eyes wide, all the teeth in his mouth were exposed, and a few words came out viciously from his teeth. "Your uncle? Are you playing tricks on me?" Li Ming looked at Dali fiercely, but everyone present heard what he said. Abel and others just looked at Li Ming inexplicably, but Dali turned his head with a puzzled look, not knowing what Li Ming just said. Dali looked Li Ming up and down, smiled slightly, and said, "You just said." Dali hadn't finished speaking. Li Ming suddenly stretched out his hand, and the lightning was dazzling, and a thick electromagnetic wave directly pierced Dali's body. Li Ming's move made everyone present stunned instantly, with a blank face, and some even took a step back in horror. Chapter 262. The killing begins. The energy of the electromagnetic wave swam and flickered, and within a few seconds, Dali's body was completely wrapped in it. Abel and others could only look terrified, and their bodies kept slowly retreating, as if they were afraid of being affected. Dali opened his eyes wide at this time. He was defenseless and still didn't understand Li Ming's intention. Blood flowed out of his mouth bit by bit, staring at Li Ming. What do you mean?" Dali said a few words with difficulty. Under Li Ming's slightly narrowed eyes, the green light on his body was bright, staring at Dali, and said, "Before the killing operation comes, I will get rid of you first, you Yin, B." Dali's facial muscles twitched slightly at this moment, and his eyes were wide open, staring at Li Ming, with an expression full of disbelief. "You, how did you know?" Dali said weakly, but Li Ming had had enough of the other party's disgusting face. He suddenly grabbed with his right hand, and the green light instantly wrapped him. 2 star capsules and several star bags floated out of Dali's body and returned to Li Ming's body along the green light. The electromagnetic waves continued to flash, but Dali's eyes had slowly closed, and there was no movement. With a fierce flick of his right hand, Dali's body fell directly to the ground, lying on the ground like a piece of meat. Blood continued to flow out of Dali's body, staining the ground red. As the body was thrown to the ground with a thump, Abel and others took a step back, looking at Li Ming in horror, and sometimes looking at each other. These people had no idea that their death was coming. Li Ming glanced at these people, snorted coldly, and suddenly jumped into the sky together, preparing to fly away from here. According to the information Li Ming got from Dali, Adriana, a high-level civilization of the Middle System, was about to arrive here. At that time, I'm afraid no one would think of leaving alive. Just as Li Ming's figure flew into the air, he felt a flash of silver light in front of his eyes. Suddenly, several twisted silver lines appeared in front of his empty eyes. In less than a second, a silver figure had appeared. The silver person was Adriana. He looked at the 20 or so 9th order civilizations on the platform below, raised his right hand, and pointed it at Li Ming's face. From Li Ming's point of view, the alien didn't even look at Li Ming, but just casually pointed his palm at him. The sudden appearance and the action of raising his hand were all completed in an instant, and even the wise eyes could not predict and capture it, but Li Ming had already mastered the information about the killing and Adriana. At that critical moment, Li Ming activated all his defense capabilities. The magic shield, the shield of the star furnace, the electromagnetic energy of magic, and the layers of defense formed in front of Li Ming. His eyes widened a little, and the silver palm radiated circles of transparent ripples, like water ripples, seemingly understated and ordinary, but a powerful energy suppressed it. This energy is something Li Ming has never seen before, and it is also the strongest that Li Ming has never felt. Bang! A muffled sound was heard, and the shields in front of Li Ming were instantly reduced to ashes and turned into tiny starlights. Li Ming's body felt a surge of energy and bounced out. Boom. A loud sound was heard, and a deep hole was knocked out on the platform. Near Abel and the others, the floor tiles and slabs were flying everywhere, and the smoke and dust rolled. Li Ming was no longer visible. From a distance, the silver man Anna appeared and raised her hand to aim at Li Ming in an instant. Anna's raised hand was like a pistol, and Li Ming was like a bullet. A transparent ripple flashed, as if the trigger of the pistol was pulled, and Li Ming shot out directly. Li Ming's body hit the platform heavily, passing through the same floors as the floors, and stopped at the bottom of the platform. This platform was originally a circular building with more than 10 floors. Under the impact of Li Ming's body just now, in addition to the deep pit left on the platform, the entire building trembled slightly. Anna in the sky turned her head slightly, and her eyes followed her palm to look at the deep hole on the platform, and she uttered a surprised "ha." She looked at the damaged part of the platform with interest for a few more times, and there was a bit of curiosity in her eyes, as if in her eyes, there was no one in the 9th level civilization who could withstand her attack. Although she looked at it a few more times, she didn't care too much, and her empty eyes soon looked at the crowd where Abel was. The figure twisted and turned into silver light and disappeared in the blink of an eye. As soon as Anna disappeared, Abel looked around in horror, and Kiris beside her whispered, "What's going on? Why are people gone? What on earth is?" When Kiris was about to say something else, the open space in front of the crowd suddenly twisted and flashed with silver lines, and Anna's silver figure had appeared. A pair of eyes swept everyone with contempt, and his right hand slowly raised to grab the hilt behind him. At the moment when his hand grasped the hilt, a strong energy aura instantly spread out, but after the sound, everyone felt a pain in their heads. It was as if their brains were frozen in an instant, and everyone's expressions were stiff, as if time had stopped. The powerful aura shocked everyone, and being shocked by the aura felt like their bodies were frozen. They had never experienced fear before, their bodies could not be controlled, and they felt that they were about to die. They could not escape, and they had no way to avoid it. Broken Sky Slashes No Lonely Souls, Level 1 Flowing Dust Weapon, Nightblade Terror. Whispering in her mouth, Adriana swung down with one hand. She drew her sword and slashed it in one go. There was a flash of silver light, and wherever the long sword passed, the silver light was like a rainbow, and everything was ashes wherever it passed. Swoosh. After a sound, a corner of the platform of the entire building disappeared. From a distance, the building looked like a piece of cake, and a missing piece seemed to be cut off by a knife. Only bursts of green smoke rose little by little from the cut surface, and those 9th level civilizations accompanied the cut piece of the building without a trace. After doing all this, Anna raised her hand and slowly put the long sword back into the scabbard on her back. She turned around and prepared to leave. However, after taking 2 steps, Anna suddenly paused, lowered her head slightly, and looked at the platform under her feet. Still alive. As she spoke, she suddenly raised her right hand, and a ball of light instantly formed in her palm. The dazzling white light was like holding up a sun. Her empty eyes narrowed slightly, and she clapped her palm at her feet. Zichu. The aurora shot out from the ball of light in her palm, and the strong light instantly penetrated the building and hit the bottom of the building. Boom. A loud noise was heard, and the earth trembled violently, as if the entire ground was shaken by some force, and the energy shock wave spread out in a circular trajectory. The circular shockwave was like an energy ring, quickly spreading from the bottom of the building, and as the energy halo spread, the entire building broke into pieces, and the building, that had originally seemed solid, was suddenly shattered into powder like a mirror. Wow. The building, which had turned into rubble, collapsed to the ground, with dust and smoke floating and rubble falling. Nothing could be seen, except a blur in the sight. Adriana floated quietly in the air, looking at her feet. She could not see anything else, except the floating dust. As the dust dissipated bit by bit, Adriana's eyes suddenly narrowed slowly. In the dispersing dust, a black shadow sphere appeared. The building debris piled up around the shadow sphere to form a small mountain range. At this time, the shadow sphere in the middle looked very strange, like a barrier. It was true from a distance, but it was completely different from Anna's perspective looking down from the air. In the middle of the shadow sphere, a hole appeared, as if it had been pierced by something, but because the hole was at the top of the shadow sphere, it could not be seen from the side. Looking down along the shadow sphere, a figure was half squatting on the ground, with green smoke constantly rising from his body and a painful expression on his face. His body seemed to have just been roasted by a fire, with only scars and the smell of evaporated blood. A squeak sound was heard, and the entire shadow sphere cracked from top to bottom with more than a dozen cracks, like a broken porcelain. There were purple cracks on the black shadow sphere, as if space was torn apart. After a few seconds, there was a crisp pop sound, and the entire shadow sphere completely shattered. Chapter 263, 1/10 of the power. As soon as the shadow fragments reached the air, they turned into tiny dots of starlight and disappeared into the air. Interesting. Adriana said softly, her floating body slowly falling, getting closer to the ground. At this time, Li Ming slowly stood up, raised his head slightly, and the silver figure in the sky had already come to a distance above Li Ming. Adriana's hollow eyes revealed a strange light, and she looked at Li Ming quietly, with a serious expression, and said, "It's really rare that there is actually someone in the 9th level who can withstand my attack." A trace of blood had already flowed from the corner of Li Ming's mouth. Looking at Anna in the sky, the muscles on his face trembled slightly, and his astonished expression was full of disbelief. For Anna's attack just now, Li Ming had gathered all his defensive abilities, but he could only barely resist it, and at the same time he also received a certain degree of trauma. "This is the strength of a first-level civilization," Li Ming whispered. The voice was not loud, but Anna in the sky heard it clearly, and the corners of her mouth rose slightly, but it was not a smile, but more like contempt. Lips slightly parted, voice came out little by little. "The strength of the first-level civilization? No, it's not." Adriana continued, looking at Li Ming, as if he was looking at a toy. Li Ming showed doubt when he heard this. Adriana said again, it seems you still have some abilities that have not been shown. I will reluctantly exert 1/10 of the ability of the first level civilization. You must try your best. This is the time to decide your life or death. Adriana said lightly, but the whole body has begun to emerge with the breath of energy. With the release of energy, the surrounding space is slightly fluctuating under its influence, and even the gravel on the ground is cracked again. After listening to what the other party said, and feeling the other party's energy breath again, Li Ming's brows can't help but frown, clench his teeth, and clench his fists tightly. His eyes narrowed slightly, and the green light virtual image was like gasoline that was suddenly ignited. It burned with a bang, and the flames and green light completely wrapped Li Ming in it. At this time, the ability of the wisdom eye could not feel any breath of the other party at all, and even the ability to predict was reduced to less than 1 second. If we just defend, there is really only one way to go. Attack, escape, look for life. Li Ming said to himself, and the blue flame suddenly expanded several times. There is no doubt that the stronger the mental power, the more Li Ming can control his own abilities. Rather than waiting for death, it is better to desperately look for life. During this time on the bearded star, Li Ming not only refined a large number of nebula pills and secret barrier pills, but also conducted in-depth research on the artifact Muxu Niteng. These are Li Ming's hard strengths. In terms of star cultivation, Li Ming also conducted in-depth research on the wormhole summoner. After all, Li Ming collected some dark energy on the alien planet. Although the summoning on the alien planet was not satisfactory, Li Ming also continued to refine this ability. In addition, the magic shield and magic ability that Li Ming obtained from the Selras people made Li Ming's strength much better. Facing this powerful enemy, Li Ming naturally had to fight with all his strength. After seeing the green flames around Li Ming's body, Adriana's mouth corners slightly raised again, and her expression was like seeing an alien, full of interest. Don't pretend, it's only 1/10, just show me your full strength. Muttering, Li Ming's figure suddenly jumped back, and at the same time, he threw his right hand into the sky, and a black ball flew straight into the distance. The black ball thrown out was the chain demon. Since Li Ming got the chain demon, he has fully mastered the ability of this thing, but Li Ming has never really taken it out to use it. He only used the chain demon ability to deal with ordinary 9th level enemies, and did not take it out. Taking it out at this time is enough to prove how much Li Ming values the opponent in front of him. The black ball slowly rose into the air, getting higher and higher, and gradually became a black dot in the sky. Adriana glanced at the sky with the corner of her eyes, not caring at all, and her eyes returned to Li Ming. Li Ming's eyes suddenly opened, and the black eyeballs turned into golden water droplets after a while. The green flames around his body were originally burning fiercely, but in a flash, they became jet-like burning. Just like the flame ejected from the tail of a rocket. This is the effect of maximizing energy. Anna paused when she saw this scene. Her eyes slightly opened, and whispered, sure enough, it's not an ordinary 9th level. It's really interesting. Although the voice was low, Li Ming's spiritual civilization could sense it clearly. He raised his right hand, and grabbed it hard. The hard action was like suddenly grasping something in front of him. With this action, the black spot in the sky fell like a bullet, but this fall was different. Every time it fell 1 meter, the size of the chain demon would expand a little. When the chain demon came to Adriana's sky, it was already a huge meteorite with a length and width of 100 meters. As the chain demon fell, the ground also cast a circular shadow, but this shadow was not an ordinary shadow, but a virtual shadow vortex state. As the size of the chain demon increased, the vortex on the ground also increased rapidly. At this time, Anna just realized something. Her empty eyes looked at the sky, and then at the bottom of her feet. The black gravity appeared in the space in the form of black strips visible to the naked eye, and the powerful energy instantly filled the entire airspace. This energy, it looks like a 9th order stardust weapon. Adriana continued to speak softly. However, while she was speaking, the meteorite above her head had already approached. Facing such a huge meteorite, Adriana was not panicked at all. She raised her right hand and pointed it at the sky and clapped it. Her palm with 5 fingers spread out quickly towards the top of her head. Dang. A loud noise sounded, like the sound of metal colliding. Circles of transparent ring-shaped ripples spread out from Adriana's palm, like water ripples, one after another, and the chain demon meteorite suddenly stopped half a foot above Adriana's palm, as if a car suddenly stepped on the brakes. It seemed that the chain demon was falling very fast, but the sudden stop and stillness was like a frozen picture, which made people incomprehensible. Li Ming saw this scene. His face changed drastically. He looked at the other party in astonishment and couldn't help but secretly said, "MD, this can be blocked." Li Ming was still unwilling to give up. Although Li Ming didn't know much about the first level civilization, he knew from information from various channels that the first level civilization was a world different from his own. But in order to survive, Li Ming had no choice. With his eyes wide open, he exerted force with his right hand again, and circles of ripples appeared in the black vortex underground. This subtle change was also noticed by Adriana, who looked at the bottom of her feet lightly. A series of swoosh, swoosh, swoosh sounds went straight into his ears, and long black chains quickly stretched out from the vortex. Each chain was as thick as an arm, and there were dozens of them, densely packed, like purgatory. Li Ming's eyes narrowed slightly at this time, and he thought to himself, so many chains. As long as they can wrap around the opponent, it will be enough to make her drink a pot. Just thinking this, Adriana snorted disdainfully, and the 5 fingers of her right hand suddenly grabbed hard, as if the 5 fingers were holding a bowling ball, and then her arm slammed to the ground. Boom. The deafening sound, the trembling earth, and the flying smoke and dust filled the entire space at once. Fortunately, Li Ming jumped far away before, otherwise he might have been affected. When the smoke and dust dissipated, a huge meteorite smashed a deep pit on the ground, and Adriana half crouched on it, with her right hand still supporting the surface of the meteorite. Li Ming was really terrified, and afraid from the bottom of his heart. Even the powerful spiritual civilization could not stabilize his emotions at this time. The scene just now was still generating residual power in his mind. Adriana actually grabbed the chain demon and smashed it onto the vortex. That chain demon was 100 meters long and wide. Not to mention the weight and volume, even the force of falling, was unbearable for ordinary people. But to Adriana, it was like a small toy, not worth mentioning. Li Ming's expression was already stiff, his eyes were wide open, his mouth was open, and he was slow to react. Adriana smiled slightly at Li Ming's expression, and the palm of her hand, that was supporting the surface of the chain demon suddenly grabbed it again, and the transparent halo was emitted. However, this time the halo did not spread around, but just wandered around the surface of the chain demon, as if a scanner had scanned the surface of the chain demon. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 264. Is this all you have? After the halo, a creaking sound was heard continuously, and cracks spread out from Adriana's palm. The cracks became narrower and wider, and spread to the entire surface of the chain demon at a speed visible to the naked eye. Snap! The sound of glass breaking came, and the chain demon meteorite, which was 100 meters long and wide, turned into fragments, and scattered on the ground. Adriana continued to float in the air. The half-crouching figure had stood up at this moment. She didn't say a word, but stared at Li Ming with her empty eyes. It felt as if she was saying, "Boy, if you have any tricks, use them quickly." Li Ming was in a daze for 2 seconds before his mind recovered. He slowly retracted his outstretched right hand and placed his palm in front of his eyes. The black aura that was still there disappeared at this moment, which also showed that the aura of the chain demon no longer existed. Looking at his right hand, Li Ming was not desperate yet. He suddenly exerted force on his right hand and clenched it tightly into a fist. The green light around his body suddenly flashed and turned into a white arc, and the jet-like flames also turned into electric light that kept jumping around. Li Ming's figure has been completely engulfed by the white light, and all that can be seen is the dazzling electromagnetic waves. At this time, the electromagnetic waves are gradually getting bigger through Li Ming's powerful energy. Arcs as thick as arms are jumping around, causing the ground to rumble. The area within dozens of meters has been completely covered by this energy. No one dares to approach such a breathtaking situation easily. Is it the magic of intelligent civilization? It looks a bit like it, Adriana said coldly, with a calm demeanor, as if she was watching a performance. The energy in the body is released bit by bit. With the powerful mental power, Li Ming's control over his own energy is gradually reaching its limit, expanding and expanding. At this time, I'm afraid that even those standing near Li Ming will be affected by this energy. The sound of sizzling is endless. Li Ming's right hand is slowly raised. The action is like lifting a heavy boulder. As the palm is raised above his head, all the electromagnetic waves slowly leave Li Ming's body and gather in the palm. From a distance, it seemed as if Li Ming had lifted up all the electromagnetic waves. It seemed as if there was a small electromagnetic star above Li Ming's head, and the radiation range also expanded from dozens of meters to nearly 100 meters. Li Ming's expression was tense, and every cell was quickly exerting its ability. He stared at Adriana in the distance with his eyes fixed. Try this, silver-skinned monster, Li Ming suddenly shouted, and his breath suddenly shook like a ring of airflow. The earth shook slightly, and the debris and gravel around him turned into dust, just like the huge thrust generated when a rocket took off. Li Ming pushed the huge electromagnetic wave ball straight to Adriana. A sound of buzz 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 sounded, like a beautiful melody, and the sound wave spread out in a visible form. The sound sounded quickly beside the eardrum, just like a fast-paced music playing. Adriana stretched out her right hand again, clasping her thumb with her middle finger, and snapping her fingers. The music was emitted from the point where the thumb and middle finger intersected, and circles of ripples also spread from that point. His eyes opened slightly unconsciously, and his middle finger released from the thumb's grip and ejected. Bang! The dull sound of the airwave collision was heard, as if something had hit the hard plastic module, and the originally dazzling and powerful electromagnetic wave suddenly began to dissipate. Just like a dandelion being blown away by the wind bit by bit, the arc and light spots turned into starlight and spread around. Fuck, what's going on? Li Ming shouted secretly. Looking from a distance, Li Ming pushed the giant electromagnetic wave towards Adriana, but the other party flicked his finger lightly, and circles of ring-shaped ripples spread out. These ripples were like a crusher. After the fierce collision, they gradually crushed Li Ming's electromagnetic wave ball into starlight, and diluted it in the air and disappeared. Li Ming's face turned pale in an instant, and he dared not continue to approach. He quickly retracted his right hand, and his body floated away. While he kept retreating, his eyes were also watching his electromagnetic waves disappear bit by bit, and he did not show any ability at all. If this is really only 1/10 of the strength of the first level civilization, then I am doomed, Li Ming said to himself. If the destruction of the chain demon was not enough to hit Li Ming's mind, then the dissipated electromagnetic waves were enough to make Li Ming's heart dead. The rationality of spiritual civilization told Li Ming that it was time to run away. At this moment, all the electromagnetic wave balls disappeared, and the air returned to calm, as if nothing had happened. Adriana looked uncomfortable, but she raised her empty eyes slightly, and looked at Li Ming's position. Li Ming's breathing had already accelerated involuntarily, and his face was full of fear. He flipped his left hand, and a nebula pill appeared in his palm. He put it on his mouth, and swallowed it directly. At the same time, he turned his body and ran away. While running away, he muttered, "Fuck you, I can't afford it, I'm leaving first." Adriana saw through Li Ming's intention at once, and her body suddenly twisted, turning into silver rays, and then disappeared on the spot. The next moment, the silver light twisted and flashed again, appearing in front of Li Ming. "It seems that this is your limit, let's send it here." Adriana's cold voice suddenly came into his ears, and her right hand quickly stretched out and aimed at Li Ming. In that 1/5 of a second, Li Ming had a foresight, and his body suddenly flashed with white light, emitting a strong light like a beam of light. Adriana's palm also condensed a ball of light, like a small sun. With a sound of zizzy, the ball of light turned into a laser and shot out. This trick was used on the circular building platform before. Its power directly penetrated Li Ming's force shields and seriously injured Li Ming. At that time, Li Ming still had a shield of the chain demon ball, but now without the chain demon, he would definitely die if he took such a hard attack. Li Ming had already thought of this. At the moment he planned to escape, Li Ming had completely given up any intention of fighting. At this time, the light column on his body was Li Ming's teleportation ability. The white light was blazing, and Li Ming's figure disappeared in an instant, leaving only a white outline. Almost at the same time, Adriana's beam of light shot out, and the beam of light directly penetrated Li Ming's remaining outline shadow, just like an aurora passing through the clouds in the sky. Under the impact, the white halo scattered. Adriana was surprised and doubtful. It seemed that her attack only hit a shadow. Li Ming in front of her had turned into starlight and disappeared. Her eyes turned left and right, as if she was checking the surroundings. At this time, a figure fell from the sky 10 kilometers away. Boom. Dust and smoke rose from the ground, as if a bomb fell to the ground. Seeing this scene, Adriana uttered again, hum, and her body turned into a silver line again, and disappeared on the spot. In a flash, the silver line appeared above the rolling dust and smoke, but after a twist, Adriana's figure reappeared. The area on the ground was still Dallas camp, and the dust and smoke wrapped a long building. This building was like a piece of bread, lying quietly on the ground, except that there was a huge hole in the middle of the building. After the dust and smoke dissipated, the damaged area became clear. In the dark building, piles of rubble rolled and slid. These building debris were formed when it was damaged just now. Half of the figure pushed away the slag. Small pieces of rubble kept falling from his body. He held his right shoulder with his left hand, with a look of pain on his face. He winked and looked like he was about to cry, and kept muttering, "This hurts too much." With his head slightly raised, Li Ming looked up at the sky from the broken hole, and Adriana's silver figure had entered his eyes. At this time, he looked down at his right shoulder, and blood flowed from his left hand covering the wound. There was no doubt that Li Ming was hit by Adriana's light column at the last moment of teleporting away. Although it was not a vital point, it also pierced his right shoulder, just like being pierced by a sharp sword. Blood and pain constantly stimulated his eyes and nerves. I managed to escape by teleporting this time, but next time. Li Ming gritted his teeth and frowned, his eyes full of fear, as if he saw the death imminent. Chapter 265. Muxu Ni Teng. Adriana slowly lowered her body in the sky until she was more than 10 meters above the building entrance. At this time, Li Ming's figure could be clearly seen. It seems that 1/10 of the power is still too high for you, but you have indeed shown me a refreshing ability. I wonder if you have any other means, because next, it will be impossible to dodge. Adriana's cold voice entered Li Ming's ears again. Li Ming's figure was stunned, his eyes turned around, and his right hand suddenly stretched out. The palm of his hand flashed with blue light, and a black object appeared from the blue light. This black object was the Muxu Ni Teng. The tender bud on it was still there, and at the same time, a point protruded on its smooth surface, just like a small bump on a person's body. Looking at the Ni Teng in his hand, Li Ming whispered to himself, "I can only try it." As he spoke, Li Ming's thumb gently slid across the tender bud, as if he was playing with a person's hair, and the next moment, his index finger slowly moved, and the thumb and index finger tightly clamped the tender bud. The thumb and index finger pinched the tender bud and pushed it upwards, and the other 3 fingers slid downwards with force. With a small sound of bang, the tender bud was pulled out by Li Ming. The blue light in his hand flashed again, and Ni Teng had disappeared, leaving only a tender bud in his hand. "Muxu Ni Teng," Li Ming whispered, and his right hand suddenly clenched, and a burst of green light swirled around his fist. At the same time, Adriana in the air outside stretched out both hands at the same time, with her palms facing up, and the backs of her palms facing down. A white halo had already formed in her palms. Looking at the halo in her hands, Adriana suddenly raised her hands above her head. The halo between her hands slowly merged, like 2 pools of water flowing together. The originally small halo now became round and large, like a pancake. At this moment, Adriana's eyes suddenly opened sharply, and after a hum sound, the halo that was originally only 2 feet in diameter suddenly spread out, and the halo suddenly expanded hundreds of times, like a layer of white gauze. Looking up at the sky again, a layer of misty and translucent things has covered all nearby areas, and the edge can't be seen at once. It is more than 10 kilometers long and wide. Looking at the building below, Adriana said coldly, "Feel the halo of annihilation." As soon as the voice fell, the huge halo began to slowly sink, as if the sky was collapsing. From a distance, it seemed as if a layer of gauze 10 kilometers long and wide was about to cover everything below. At this time, Li Ming no longer paid attention to the sky. He looked at his right hand, and the green light on his body flashed up, like a sudden burning flame. His eyes narrowed slightly, and his right hand turned over and slapped the ground in front of him. As soon as the palm touched the ground, a layer of green light spread out from the palm as the center point. The green light was like a scanner, spreading rapidly along the uneven ground, just like laying a carpet. Any object close to the ground, any life, was covered by the green light. And the place after the green light immediately gave birth to a layer of green sprouts, like the grass just unearthed, densely packed. The white halo in the sky continued to sink, and the top of a tall building was the first to touch the halo. As soon as it touched, the top of the building made a crackling sound. The sound was very small, like firecrackers. After the sound, the building turned into powder and scattered to the ground. These buildings are very different. Some are made of bricks, stones, and metal, and some are also decomposed cabins of spacecraft. The hardest ones are naturally those cabins, and the next are metal buildings. But no matter what type of building, as long as it touches a halo, it will immediately turn into powder. The halo is approaching the ground little by little, and everything it touches will be reduced to ashes. The area with a diameter of 10 kilometers will return to silence little by little under this halo. At the same time, the green halo is also spreading rapidly along the ground, and the faster it spreads to the periphery, the faster it spreads. As the green halo spreads, those grass-like plants are also growing rapidly, but the position of Li Ming's green light center is very different from the periphery. The diffusion of the periphery is still just tender grass, but the center has grown 5 or 6 meters high, and is getting thicker and thicker. Adriana in the air paused, her eyes suddenly widened. Is this the growth of all things, of biological civilization? No. Impossible. That ability is not something that low-level civilizations can use, and this guy is an intelligent civilization. It is even more impossible to use the ability of biological civilization. Adriana was talking to herself, and immediately revealed a puzzled expression, whispering again, "But, what is this?" Adriana was staring at it in confusion. The white halo continued to decrease, and many buildings had been destroyed and completely disappeared. The most important thing is that the plants around Li Ming were about to touch the white halo. These plants were different. Some were thick trees, and some were soft vines, but they were all species that Li Ming had never seen before. After a while, the area of the green halo had exceeded the range of the white halo, and the momentum continued to spread without any reduction. A large number of plants began to grow wildly, and the surface of the planet, that was a desert building just now, was all turned into green plants. Bang, bang, bang. A series of muffled sounds were heard, and the white halo finally touched the growing plants. From the perspective of the high altitude, each contact point was making a sound, and at the same time, circles of ripples were spreading on the surface of the white halo. As soon as the vines touched the halo, they turned into powder like the previous buildings. Even the branches and leaves of the big tree were the same, but the trunk of the big tree seemed to be extremely hard. After the leaves and branches dissipated, the thick trunk pushed up. Crack. Bang. The chaotic sounds kept echoing in the ears. Countless tree trunks firmly resisted the white halo. The tree trunks were extremely hard, and did not turn into powder under the effect of the white halo. On the contrary, the tree trunks continued to grow against the halo. It was as if a piece of transparent glass was going to crush a forest, but it was obviously not possible. Li Ming breathed deeply, his eyes looking straight up, watching the contest between the tree trunks and the white halo, and he breathed a sigh of relief. We have to leave here. After turning his head around and finding a direction, Li Ming ran away. At this time, Li Ming was like being in a primeval forest. There was endless green all around his head, and sometimes branches and leaves that continued to grow suddenly stretched out in front of him. Li Ming only focused on running, and he had long forgotten about other things. Adriana in the sky still changed her expression. When she blinked, she was a little worried and whispered, "The halo of annihilation is almost unbearable, and this plant." At this point, Adriana's eyes were already looking further away. At this time, the place where he could see was full of green plants, and there was no end in sight. not to mention on the ground of Bidit. Even in the space of Bidit, a piece of green could be seen. For a barren planet, green is rare, but at this time, looking from space, a piece of green has appeared on Bidit, and it is still expanding. Even Adriana couldn't calm down after seeing this scene. She narrowed her eyes slightly and said to herself again, "What on earth is this?" Before she finished speaking, a trembling sound suddenly came from under her. The white halo had become unstable, like a shaking glass, rising and falling, and it seemed that it would break at any time. Adriana looked stern and raised her hand to prepare to do something, but at this moment, a squeak, creak sound came immediately, and the entire white halo actually appeared cracks. The center point of the cracks was completely different, and the entire white halo was full of cracks. On the surface, the shattering trend was irreversible, and the rest was just a matter of time. Li Ming, who was running wildly, also noticed this strange phenomenon. While running, he did not forget to look up, and saw that the halo at the top was torn into pieces, like cracks on the ice, which could break at any time. Li Ming didn't care about this. He turned his eyes to the side and looked at the wound on his right shoulder that was still bleeding. His legs quickened his running speed. Li Ming's body was very strong now, and he had also refined a lot of secret pills. Just like eating, he took one pill every once in a while. Facing the wound at this time, Li Ming could only use the light medicine ability he had learned to treat it. Chapter 266 I have to run away. At this level, Li Ming can use low-level light medicine to great effect. His wounds are healing little by little. Li Ming doesn't have to worry about energy. The many nebula pills on his body provide all the guarantees. After running for a while, he can see the end of the halo. The plants there are now towering trees. Li Ming finally saw the light and smiled. Before he could stop smiling, he heard a series of crisp sounds of pa pa pa. The white halo was broken. The fragments scattered along the traces of the cracks, like a puzzle without organization, and turned into starlight that slowly diluted and disappeared. Adriana in the air was also startled after hearing this sound. Although it was expected, it was inevitable that her face changed slightly. With the sound of breaking, the densely packed plants rose from the ground one by one, like birds breaking free from their restraints, soaring into the sky. Adriana disappeared among the branches before she could react. The vines and branches were not stable during their growth. Any creature within their range became their attack point. The branches and vines crisscrossed and rushed towards Adriana, as if they were going to penetrate and tear her apart. Faced with such a dangerous situation, Adriana's calm expression was gone. She raised her right hand and clenched the hilt on her left shoulder, looking around. While the vines and branches were attacking and growing, they continued to release dark green smoke, which was as daunting as poisonous fog. This made Adriana feel something strange. With a sudden force on her right hand, the long sword was unsheathed and swung out. Shock blade chaos. Adriana swung her arms quickly, and countless silver lights turned into light blades that slashed in all directions of her body. The silver blade that flew out was only 2 meters long at first, but as the distance increased, the silver blade actually expanded rapidly, just like Li Ming's previous chain demon. When it flew out of the body for dozens of meters, the 2-meter long silver blade was also 100 meters long. The silver light was raging, and everything it passed through was broken. After this round of blades, Adriana's figure appeared again, and the branches and vines that originally surrounded her all scattered to the ground. But before Adriana could do anything, new branches and vines grew again, and the density and quantity did not change at all. Seeing this scene, Adriana's expression became solemn, and she thought to herself, infinite growth. Could it be? Suddenly, a name suddenly emerged in her mind. Although Adriana did not say it out loud, she had begun to move closer to this suspicion. She looked more carefully at the plants that were still growing, and paid more attention to the details. The growth of leaves, the extension of vines, and the growth of branches were all taken in by her eyes. Muxuniteng. Only this artifact can achieve this effect in an instant. Adriana's head turned slightly, and after summarizing the captured information, she came to this conclusion, based on her own cognition. But after seeing the green vines and branches, his expression relaxed slightly. He took a deep breath and whispered, "It seems to be only Netting's primary ability, otherwise the plants growing Cannot be just this type. I didn't expect this guy actually has a divine weapon. Thinking of this, Adriana suddenly realized and looked around quickly, looking for Li Ming's whereabouts, but the dense branches and leaves had completely blocked the vision. Apart from the branches and leaves, nothing else could be seen, let alone Li Ming. However, at this time, Li Ming had already flown into the sky far away. During the flight, Li Ming did not forget to look back at the green plants on the ground, and he could not find Adriana's figure, but Li Ming still knew her approximate location. Now is the best time for Li Ming to escape, speeding up and heading straight for a giant octagonal spaceship in the sky. This octagonal spaceship is huge, and it is the joint spaceship of Abel and others. Its main function is to enter the middle system, because the spaceship has the ability to decompose, and can be transformed into 27 medium-sized spaceships. This ability can distract the enemy's attention, and ensure the possibility of one of them entering the middle system as much as possible. At present, it is naturally impossible to enter the central system, but such a huge spaceship is the best tool for Li Ming to escape. His figure flew higher and higher, and soon he came to the bottom of the spaceship. Li Ming narrowed his eyes slightly, and the energy shield with a barrier effect had emerged. This is something that all advanced spaceships have, and it is not easy to break through. When Li Ming escaped from the alien planet, he chose to share a spaceship with Balibin, because he could not break through the barrier. At this critical moment of escape, Li Ming naturally had to try. With his eyes focused, the barrier information had entered his brain under his wisdom. Li Ming's right hand suddenly flashed with light, and energy began to condense, but just when Li Ming was about to force a breakthrough, his figure suddenly paused. Huh? This spaceship actually recorded my information? He couldn't help but mutter to himself. This is indeed strange. The information about Li Ming is displayed in the information of the barrier. In other words, Li Ming is also one of the owners of this spaceship. Although he doesn't understand why, it is not the time to think about these things. He stretched out his hand and a green light shot out. The shield rippled and actually opened in response. Li Ming smiled slightly, even a little surprised. The bottom of the huge spaceship suddenly flashed slightly, and a blue beam of light shone down. Li Ming flew over quickly without hesitation. Li Ming started to fly towards the blue beam of light, but the ground in the distance suddenly made a loud buzzing sound, and silver light blades shot out in all directions. As the light blades flew, a large area of green plants was cut in half. In front of the silver blades, these plants were completely vulnerable. Adriana once again chopped off the approaching branches and vines with her chaotic blades. Her body twisted and turned into a silver curve and disappeared directly on the spot. Adriana had just left, and her original position was immediately swallowed by branches and vines again. When the silver light appeared again, it was already higher in the air. This position was no longer a position that branches and vines could reach, so Adriana naturally felt relieved. A higher position naturally has a better view. Avoiding those plants is one aspect, and the other is to find Li Ming's whereabouts. The empty eyes suddenly shrank, and all the details of the ground entered her eyes. The slightly rotating head scanned slowly like a machine. Adriana carefully observed some areas of the ground, but did not find Li Ming's whereabouts. Of course, there were those growing plants below, and it would be difficult for Li Ming to be found, even if he was among them. However, at this moment, Adriana's head suddenly turned and looked at the octagonal spaceship in the distance. At this time, a blue light at the bottom of the spaceship caught her attention, but Adriana only saw the blue light and did not see the figure. The most important thing was that the blue light disappeared in a flash. Although she only saw one side, Adriana knew very well that the blue light was the transmission ladder, indicating that someone had just entered the spaceship. A pair of eyes immediately focused on the spaceship, and then she snorted coldly, and her body twisted again, turning into a silver line and disappearing. When the silver line flashed and appeared, Adriana had already arrived near the octagonal spaceship. The right hand holding the long sword suddenly raised high, and a pair of eyes stared at the spaceship motionlessly. Regardless of whether Li Ming entered the spaceship or not, based on the blue light just now, the spaceship should have disappeared. Whoosh! Adriana raised her arm and slashed it down. A silver blade of light shot out. This light wave was different from the previous chaotic blades. It was tens of meters long at the moment of slashing, as if it had cut a gap. The light blade was still in front of Adriana's eyes when it just came out, but a second later, the light blade had appeared at the other end of the spaceship. It seemed that the light blade just flashed from the front of the spaceship to the back of the spaceship, but the next moment, the entire octagonal spaceship suddenly broke in the middle, like a cookie being split in half. The middle of the broken spaceship made a sizzling sound, and the electric light kept jumping. The entire spaceship seemed to be about to explode at any time. Li Ming, who was in the spaceship, only felt his body tilted, and almost fell to the ground. Chapter 267, Escape. Impossible. He half crouched on the ground, with one hand on the ground, and glanced at the undestroyed control panel. Without time to think, he moved and floated in the air of the main cabin. At the same time, he swung his right arm and a beam of green light shot out. Bang! The green light shot to the control panel and scattered, followed by a series of light sounds, and blue light flashed. The structure of the entire spacecraft has been revealed. Li Ming only took a rough look, then injected a command into it, and then went straight to a certain portal. The octagonal spacecraft is composed of 27 medium-sized spacecraft. The order Li Ming gave to the control panel was to decompose all the spacecraft. Under this order, the blue light on the control panel has drawn a 3D model. This model is the octagonal spacecraft, but it is usually red and usually blue. Because the spacecraft was cut in the middle, the control panel as the command center can only control half of the spacecraft, while the other half cannot be controlled. The red part is the part that cannot accept orders, and the blue part has entered the decomposition process. The order was already being executed, but the broken part of the spaceship also began to make a rumbling explosion, and flames and explosion debris continued to spray out, and the two halves of the spaceship fell to the ground little by little. Adriana looked at the spaceship in front of her calmly, and raised the long sword in her hand again. Just as she was about to cut it down again, half of the spaceship suddenly trembled with a buzzing sound, and a whoosh 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 sound was heard. This half of the spaceship actually decomposed into nearly 10 medium-sized spaceships. The scene was like a puzzle that suddenly disassembled itself, and each decomposed part turned into an independent spaceship and flew away quickly. Decomposed spaceship. Adriana was very surprised, and her raised right hand slowly lowered, watching the spaceships fly away from here. That kid must be in one of them. Adriana's eyes turned around, and she was not too panicked, but it was impossible to find Li Ming immediately at this moment. Adriana gently put the sword back on her back, and at the same time, she pointed her right hand in front of her body and lightly tapped it. After a buzzing sound, a circular spaceship suddenly appeared in front of her body. The appearance of this spaceship was also silver, and it suddenly appeared, as if it had transformed. It was extremely wonderful. Adriana's figure floated, and came to the top of the spaceship. A silver light flashed, and the figure suddenly disappeared, and the spaceship also shook and flew away. The silver spaceship immediately locked onto one of the decomposed spaceships. The super fast flying speed was naturally not comparable to the decomposed spaceship. A silver light flashed in the air, and it had already approached a decomposed spaceship. The silver spaceship itself was a circle, but at this moment, the semicircular part in front of the spaceship suddenly extended out, protruding out of the spaceship body in an arc state, just like a semicircular drawer suddenly pulled out a small opening. But the next moment, this protruding arc-shaped device suddenly lit up, as if a light was suddenly turned on, and the light flashed softly, which was a powerful energy. The target was already firmly locked on the operating table inside the silver spaceship. Swoosh, boom. A curved blade suddenly shot out from the arc flash, just like the slash of Adriana's long sword, except that the spacecraft fired parallel ones. With a rumble, the parallel curved blade flashed and hit the decomposed spacecraft in front, and suddenly flames burst out, and the broken debris of the decomposed spacecraft flew everywhere and fell to the ground. After destroying one ship, the silver spacecraft turned around and immediately rushed to the next target. At this time, Li Ming was in one of the spacecraft. Fortunately, Li Ming had not been noticed by Adriana. Just when the octagonal giant spacecraft was decomposed, Li Ming had set up the transmission paths of all the decomposed spacecraft. These transmission paths are different and correspond to different directions. As for the specific locations and coordinates, they are completely random, but they are all safe coordinates. After a while of flying, these spacecrafts began to transmit. It seems that there are nearly 10 spacecrafts, but only one is manned, and the others are unmanned spacecrafts. Adriana can only destroy them one by one, until she finds Li Ming's spacecraft. The strength of advanced civilizations is not limited to the strength of individuals. The comprehensive strength of their spacecraft and equipment is also extremely powerful. The current flight speed is an obvious contrast. Adriana's silver spaceship destroyed 3 spaceships after a few turns and headed straight for the 4th one. However, the other spaceships were already stationary in the air at this time, and they had just started to teleport. Seeing this scene, Adriana couldn't help but panic. She frowned at the horizontal operating table and whispered, "They actually started to teleport at the same time." Turning on the teleport means that the spaceship will be stationary, which is undoubtedly the best time to attack, but due to the large number of scattered spaceships, Adriana can't destroy them all. Of course, Li Ming was also very nervous at this time. His eyes were fixed on the operating table in front of him. Once he was locked by the opponent at this time, everything would fall short. 6 light spots flashed on the operating table. They were all the decomposed chips. Li Ming looked at them nervously. These light spots were the only remaining spaceships, and the others had been destroyed. As he was watching, one of the light spots suddenly went out. Li Ming's expression did not change, but his heart skipped a beat, because Li Ming could not guarantee whether he would be the next one. However, the spaceship's transmission was also coming to an end. The electric arc kept jumping on the surface of the spaceship. After a few seconds, with a sound of bang, the spaceship completely disappeared. When he opened his eyes again, he was already in space. Li Ming breathed a sigh of relief and his body completely relaxed. Once the spaceship is transmitted to space, it has basically escaped halfway, because the transmission to space has fixed coordinates and positions, and there are multiple decomposition ships being transmitted at the same time. If Adriana wants to track, she can only go to space first, and then find the whereabouts of each decomposition ship. However, entering space is only the first step of transmission. According to the random setting of the system, these decomposition ships have set the transmission coordinates to the maximum. Simply put, as long as the spaceship still has energy, it will continue to transmit according to the known safe coordinates. Li Ming's mood has stabilized, his demeanor has returned to calm, and he is waiting for the second stage of the spaceship's transmission. This is all automatically formed, and Li Ming does not need to operate manually. Looking at the operating table, 5 light spots continue to flash in the outer space of Bidded Star. These are all decomposition ships that have been transmitted. However, as Li Ming was watching, one of the light spots suddenly went out. What the hell? Li Ming suddenly tensed up and said to himself in confusion. This was indeed a bit surprising and beyond Li Ming's understanding. However, after thinking for a while, Li Ming suddenly thought of something, and his expression became serious. Could it be that a spaceship of a first-level civilization has such a strong exploration ability? Li Ming looked at the operating table in disbelief. It was not unreasonable for him to mutter like this. After all, the strength and cognition of a high-level civilization were not something that a low-level civilization could understand. But just as he finished speaking, another light spot on the operating table went out. This made Li Ming unable to remain calm anymore. At the same time, he narrowed his eyes and stared at the operating table in front of him. At this time, the surface of the spaceship where Li Ming was already wrapped in ox. After a slight flash, it disappeared from the spot with a bang. But just as the spaceship disappeared, a spaceship flashed in the airspace near this position. It was Adriana's silver spaceship. However, because it was a step late, it still missed. Adriana, who was in the main cabin of the spaceship, sat in front of the operating table with an extremely ugly face. At this time, there was no target position on the operating table. Adriana clenched her fists in anger and said to herself, "Escape from my hands? Impossible." As she spoke, Adriana pointed her finger at the console and tapped it lightly. Just like tapping on the water ripples spread in the Bidded Star on the console began to shrink. The shrinking of Bidded Star here means that the radar range of the spacecraft is expanding. In a moment, the planets around Bidit star also shrank. The exploration range of Adriana's spacecraft became larger and larger, and the speed became faster and faster. It seemed that it would soon cover the entire Bidit galaxy. Chapter 268 Chaos Galaxy. Li Ming sat cross-legged quietly in the spaceship. The spaceship had already teleported several times, and was still teleporting. However, Li Ming did not care about the location and direction of the teleportation. He just closed his eyes and rested quietly. The wound on his right shoulder was recovering little by little, and the functions of his body were also returning to normal. The use of the artifact consumed a lot of energy in Li Ming's body. The most important thing at this time was naturally to restore energy and heal the wound. After an unknown amount of time, Li Ming's body had recovered a lot, and Li Ming also took another nebula pill. This pill can quickly restore energy, and is the best pill known in the outer system. The recovery of his body and mind made Li Ming very excited, and his attention quickly returned to the operating table. After a quick glance, Li Ming's eyebrows slightly raised, and he couldn't help but take a breath. Chaos Galaxy? Mumbling a few words, Li Ming frowned slightly. The console flickered slightly, and information about the Chaos Galaxy also emerged. All information about this galaxy is public, and basically all spacecraft know the existence of this galaxy. Li Ming had only heard of it before, but was not very familiar with it. At this time, he suddenly arrived in this galaxy, and couldn't help but be curious. The Chaos Galaxy is not very far from the Bidit galaxy. It is a relatively public galaxy, because there is no civilization in this galaxy. There are 2 planets in the Chaos Galaxy that are famous throughout the outer system, that is, Galley Star and Gigi Star. Galley Star is also known as the Information Resource Trading Center. Although no civilization was born on this planet, it is full of resource materials of special materials. These materials can mainly be used to make portals, teleportation arrays, trading systems, etc. It is this planet composed of special materials that attracts a large number of galaxy civilizations to gather here. These materials are undoubtedly a precious resource of equipment materials. After transporting them back to their home planet for processing and making them into equipment, they can be used and sold. However, with the development of time, this place has become a long-term residence for many civilized galaxies. With the increase in population, trading has also arisen, and the materials used to make the trading system can be taken locally. Therefore, under the impetus of such development, resource trading and information trading have also formed a scale. And in a very short time, it was known by more civilizations, which formed today's Information Resource Trading Center. However, this place is not as chaotic as Bidit Star. It has a very formal management system, which is not inferior to the cruise bay. However, such a mixed place is bound to have various conflicts and small-scale battles, and there are still certain dangers. This danger is not unavoidable, because the planet is huge, but the formal trading places are limited. As long as you go to the formal trading area, there will be no accidents. Li Ming still has a deep understanding of this. Because most of the trading ships on Bidit Star are set up by star raiders, it can be seen that it is dangerous. Li Ming smiled slightly at this information. This kind of place is also a place that Li Ming likes at the moment. With a move of his fingers, he locked onto the Galastar of the Chaos Galaxy. His eyes turned slightly, and the planet called the Star of Silent Sacrifice also attracted Li Ming's attention. The Star of Silence is one of the most dangerous planets. Another planet that is equally dangerous is the Star of Abraham. Li Ming knew that the Star of Abraham was a turning point leading to the central system. It was covered with poisonous gas and wild beasts, and was extremely dangerous. Looking at the information of the Star of Silence, the basic information was similar to that of the Star of Abraham. They were both highly toxic planets. Not only could aliens not enter, but even alien spacecraft were not suitable for long-term stay on the planet. It was a veritable alien forbidden area. Li Ming shook his head slightly. It was obvious that Li Ming had no interest in this kind of planet and there was no need to go there. If it was the Star of Abraham, Li Ming might still take the risk and try, but since it was here, he would forget it. His eyes returned to the Star of Gala in the Chaos Galaxy again. He smiled slightly and came to the side of the cabin and sat down. The coordinates had been marked, and Li Ming only had to wait for the transmission. Li Ming was getting closer and closer to the Chaos Galaxy, and in a huge meteorite area on the Star of Gala, many low-level aliens were busy. Although these meteorites look like meteorites, they are actually spaceships, almost the same as the meteorite spaceships of Inkinaya, but there are some differences between these aliens and the Inkinaya people. These aliens have long bodies, a bit like snakes, and each alien has 4 hands and a short tail behind them, which looks weird. In one of the meteorite spaceships, a guy from the 9th level civilization sat in the highest position, looking down at the people in front of him. There are also 9th level people among these people, but their status is obviously not high, so they can only stand at the first position below. Everyone looks at the high ranking 9th level with respect. My secret return this time has caused dissatisfaction among those people. It is very likely that they have sent people to hunt me down, but you don't have to worry. As long as I come back from the silent sacrifice star, they can't do anything, even if they find me. The 9th level civilization sitting on the high place said confidently. The people below bowed their heads and saluted, feeling very respectful. One of the 9th rank civilizations showed a hint of hesitation, but hesitated to speak. He looked awed, but still afraid in his heart. After a faint smile, he said, Lord Xenozoi, that matter of star status. Xenozoi, who was sitting high up, rolled his eyes, looked at the 9th rank civilization, and said softly, HMM. After a pause, he continued, don't worry about this. Star status originally belongs to us, Dina biological civilization. I'm just one of the heirs. When I come back from the Star of Silence, I will naturally hand it over to you. As soon as these words came out, the 9th rank civilization smiled slightly, showing satisfaction. However, Xenozoi still looked at the other party and said, Hamhan, how are my spaceship and equipment prepared? The 9th level civilization named Hamhan immediately smiled and said, don't worry, everything is ready and there won't be any problems. I asked the Shixing people to make these equipment, and the quality is absolutely guaranteed. Xenozoi nodded with satisfaction, and at the same time, he fixed his eyes on the other party again and said, then has the thing I brought back been put up? Hamhan nodded again, bowed and said, it has been put up at the Babette trading station. Yes. Xenozoi showed satisfaction again. Hamhan hesitated at this time, as if he had something to say. This little action was naturally seen by Xenozoi, but Xenozoi did not say it, but after sweeping the others, he said, you all retreat first. Hamhan and I have some things to explain to each other alone. Everyone in the cabin retreated after hearing the voice, not daring to stay any longer. After a while, only Hamhan and Xenozoi were left in the cabin. Xenozoi snorted and said, go ahead. Hamhan was relieved and said, actually, there is nothing else to say. You have gained a lot this time. If you succeed, it will be a big deal for our entire Dina people. So what I mean is, if that thing is not traded out. Before Hamhan finished speaking, Xenozoi understood his intention and smiled lightly, saying, you want to get that thing, right? Hamhan smiled euphemistically at first, but his expression immediately brightened and he said, I'm also for the revitalization of our Dina people, and I have no selfish motives. Hehe. Xenozoi couldn't help laughing a few times when hearing this, and looked at Hamhan with his eyes, and said, do you know the origin of these things? Hamhan was startled when he heard this, and after hesitating for a while, he shook his head slightly. Xenozoi stood up from her seat and continued, I'm not afraid to tell you this secret. I got these 3 things from the prison on the planet Bergson. You should know that I came back secretly. If those advanced civilizations find out that I'm here, not only me, but also the entire Dina tribe will be destroyed. So, I must keep the secret no matter what, until I return from the planet of silence. Hamhan's expression suddenly became serious when he heard this, and he replied, don't worry, this matter will never be known to outsiders. Chapter 269, Babette Trading Station. Xenozoi walked down slowly from the height, stretched out his hand and patted Hamhan on the shoulder, saying, the auction of that thing is just to attract people's attention, so that I can quietly do what I should do on the silent sacrifice star. When I come back, the world will be completely changed. By that time, these things will have no value to me. Are you still worried about not being able to advance? Well, Concentrate on your work. Having said so, Xenazoi smiled and left the cabin. In the space of Galley Star, Li Ming's spaceship flew slowly. After a series of safe coordinate transmissions, Li Ming was already in the predetermined orbit of space. The next step was to find the land coordinates of Galley Star and transmit. Li Ming looked at the operating table and occasionally moved his hand on it, with a hesitant look on his face. As far as the transmission coordinates are concerned, Li Ming collected a lot from the operating table, which were located at various trading points on Galley Star. This is like searching for many stores, each with its own characteristics, and many of them show their own services. For example, free spaceship parking, free accommodation, etc. These are all things that Li Ming needs to consider. After all, for Li Ming, the more hidden, the better, because Li Ming does not want to run into Adriana, who has a first level civilization, again, otherwise he will surely die. While Li Ming was checking one by one, a place called Babette Trading Station caught Li Ming's attention. This is one of the largest trading points on Galastar, and one of the places with a relatively dense population. Naturally, there is no need to consider concealment. However, these are not the main reasons that attracted Li Ming. Li Ming was able to notice this place because there is a huge label BGUI here. In other words, this trading station called Babette is trading BGUI. Li Ming couldn't help but take a deep breath and whispered, "Are you kidding? Will anyone take out BGUI for trading?" As he said this, Li Ming's right hand unconsciously touched his chin, his eyes slightly narrowed, and he kept looking at the operating table. Li Ming already had 1 BGUI, which was enough for an ordinary 9th rank, but Li Ming needed 3. So when he saw the information about BGUI, how could he not be deeply attracted? Although Li Ming didn't believe that anyone in the outer system would sell this item, he couldn't help but want to take a look. Thinking of this, Li Ming snorted and said, "No matter whether it's true or not, let's go and take a look first." He muttered this, and his right hand had already stretched out, aiming at the operating table and lightly tapping it, confirming the target of Babette. After determining the transmission coordinates, the spacecraft automatically moved to the target, and Li Ming sat cross-legged on the ground again, thinking about some things related to himself. The chain demon has been destroyed, and Li Ming's combat effectiveness must have decreased slightly, but there is nothing to worry about when dealing with ordinary 9th rank. In addition, there is the artifact Muxu Niteng, which is not easy to use. First of all, the artifact will only produce green buds when it is nourished by energy, and this green bud is a weapon that can be used on a large scale or alone. But the biggest problem is that this thing must produce green sprouts. The common point between artifacts and Stardust weapons is that they both require the injection of mind consciousness, but the difference is that the use of artifacts has certain restrictions on civilizations. That is, only civilizations that agree with the artifacts can use them. If they do not correspond, even if they use them, they cannot maximize the power of the artifacts. Muxunetting is a biological civilization weapon, and only with biological civilization can its power be maximized. If other civilizations use this weapon, it is not impossible, but they cannot exert the power that the artifact should have, which is relatively wasteful. However, if you get this weapon, even if you don't use it, you can use it for trading and exchange for what you want. For Li Ming now, the use of the artifact is only in the initial stage. He cannot control the growth of green sprouts, nor can he completely control the artifact with consciousness. Therefore, this thing cannot be used as the main means of saving his life for Li Ming at the moment. Li Ming's mind is constantly turning, and his various abilities are being flipped through one by one. He is looking for an ability that can hide himself. Thinking about it, Li Ming smiled slightly, and he has already paid attention. Buzzing a sound was heard, and Li Ming's thoughts were interrupted. He stood up and looked at the control panel. His spaceship had arrived at the destination, the Babette Trading Station. The spaceship was stationary in the air more than 10 meters high. At the same time, other spaceships were densely packed around Li Ming's spaceship. These spaceships were stacked and parked in an orderly manner, like a multi-story parking lot. A blue light shot out from the bottom of the spaceship, and then Li Ming's figure appeared in the blue light, and slowly fell to the ground like taking an elevator. During this time, Li Ming's eyes began to look around, and the environment of Babette also came into his eyes. The so-called Babette trading station is a bunch of round buildings. These buildings are not single, but multiple spheres spliced together, just like a dozen candied horse strings placed vertically together. Some are high and some are low. Each spherical building is hundreds of meters long and wide, huge, which also makes the entire building look majestic and huge. Very wonderful. The building is surrounded by flat roads, which are artificially built and smooth. The original geographical features of Galistar need to be understood from a farther place. A few kilometers away, the mountains are surrounded by ups and downs. Each mountain is strong and straight, and it is slightly shiny in the sun. These mountains are a rare kind of rock, which gives people a sense of incomparable hardness just from the surface. Although the mountains are long, there are few green plants, which look bare and desolate. Li Ming has already understood the general environment, and didn't care too much. As soon as his feet landed, he ran to the circular building. In this spaceship's parking place, aliens can be seen everywhere. Some have just arrived, and some are ready to leave. People come and go in an endless stream. These aliens are not all unfamiliar. Li Ming can recognize many of them, including Fulastar, Inkinaya, Shistar, etc. There are not many high-level civilizations. At first glance, there is no 9th level civilization. Most of them are 7th level or below. 8th level civilizations are also rarely seen. Li Ming, the 9th level civilization, is very abrupt and conspicuous at this time. Those low-level people could only avoid Li Ming from a distance and be cautious. They didn't know Li Ming's origin, but sensing the strength of the 9th level, the only correct thing to do was to avoid him. Li Ming walked forward and came to a spherical building on the bottom floor of the Babette trading station. The first thing he saw was a spacious portal. The whole door was white, 50 meters wide and more than 4 meters high. People kept coming in and out of it. It was the first time that Li Ming saw such a wide portal, but it was not surprising. After all, this Galistar itself was the source of teleportation materials, and it was natural to make such a huge portal. His eyes narrowed and looked around all the time. Various information kept entering Li Ming's mind, but in the consciousness of these low-level civilizations, Li Ming did not find any information about Beigui's transaction. Thinking in his mind, his feet did not stop at all. He walked a few steps quickly and came to the portal. With a light slide of his fingers, Li Ming entered it. The white light flashed again, and Li Ming walked out of the portal. At this time, he was already in a spacious house. Looking back behind him, the portal he walked out of was independent and not wide. Looking around, people were coming and going, and they seemed very busy. Li Ming walked deeper, and a huge light pattern appeared in front of him. This light pattern was woven from the operating table below. However, this operating table was an authorized operating table, and anyone could operate it, but they would be restricted, and could only see things that they could see. Li Ming walked forward quickly, his eyes widened a little. This huge circular operating table was dozens of meters long and wide, and the light extended to a height of more than 10 meters in the sky. Surrounding the operating table were spring-shaped circular steps, which wrapped the light like ropes, and many people stood on each level of the steps. These people touched the light with their hands, looking for and checking the items they wanted. Li Ming saw the purpose of this thing with a glance, and when he came to a place where no one was, he gently stretched out his right hand and pointed his index finger. The light was connected to Li Ming's finger, and various information continued to enter his mind. Chapter 270. I'm as rich as a local tycoon, but I have to keep a low profile. The information of Beigui was in it, and the description of this object was also very accurate. The Beigui in this transaction came from a biological civilization called the Dina tribe. All the information related to Beigui was entered into the system of the trading station, including the picture of Beigui. Anyone who has seen this object can immediately identify it. Li Ming only took a simple look and confirmed that this object was Beigui. This also made Li Ming open his mouth in surprise, and he couldn't help but think in his heart, to be honest, someone is really selling this kind of thing. Although Beigui is a good thing, it is only a material for synthesizing the power of Liuan. Without a synthesis master, this thing is useless. This is one of the reasons why Li Ming can think of this thing being traded. Moreover, in order to enter the first level civilization, not only the power of Li Yuan is needed, but also Huayu. Compared with Beiji Huayu is the real rare thing. Li Ming has not heard any news about Huayu so far. However, since he has seen Beiji, Li Ming will naturally try his best to get it. Li Ming's consciousness continued to sense the remaining information, and he could not help but frown. This Beigi was not a hanging item, but a nominal sale. In other words, it could not be exchanged directly from the trading station. It was necessary to meet the other party's trading conditions before the other party could trade with it face to face. But after seeing the other party's trading conditions, Li Ming's heart was still half cold. 10 nebula pills, 100 nebula powers, and 10 star glory. Your uncle? Is this a robbery? Who can afford such conditions? Li Ming said to himself. With Li Ming's wealth, nebula pills and nebula powers are enough, but Li Ming does not have 10 star glory. Withdrawing his right hand from the light, Li Ming stood there in a daze. While thinking, Li Ming's eyes kept looking around. There were also many 9th level beings around this operating table. Li Ming's wisdom eyes could occasionally see some related information from them. His eyes scanned those people, and finally stopping on a 9th level civilization. The things in the alien's mind caught Li Ming's attention, which also made Li Ming start to look at him carefully. The god-like head, with a tuft of black hair on the top of the head, was wrapped in a red cloak, and was standing in front of the operating table checking something. From his mind, Li Ming learned that the person who sold Beiji was an extremely powerful 9th level, named Zenozoi, who belonged to the Dina tribe, and had lived on the Galastar for many years. It was unknown where the home star system of this race was, but it belonged to biological civilization. Speaking of Zenozoi, that was a long time ago. This can be traced back to the last galactic war. The Milky Way was invaded by 2 galaxies and a long-lasting and large-scale galactic war occurred. This war is just an expanded version of the interstellar war, because for civilized creatures, resources are necessary materials for survival and growth. Wars are often based on the plunder or possession of resources. When Li Ming was on Earth, he knew that the resources on Earth, where humans live, are being depleted little by little, so finding a new habitable planet is imminent. However, the human civilization on Earth is relatively low, and still needs to be developed. From a broad perspective, humans are developing towards a technological civilization, and are very likely to become a technological civilization in the future, but this is still unknown, because the formation of the foundation of civilization is a long process and there are multiple stages, so it is difficult to draw a conclusion now. However, one thing is certain, as long as resources are exhausted, civilized creatures will find ways to ensure the continuation of their species. This is also the main reason for the outbreak of interstellar wars. Similarly, advanced civilizations have a greater demand for resources. If the resources of the entire galaxy are used up, then a galactic war will inevitably be launched. A galaxy as large as the Milky Way is still relatively rich in resources, which has a certain relationship with the number of stars, because stars are the source of light energy. If there is an invasion from a galaxy outside the Milky Way, it will inevitably be resisted. In order to resist the invasion of other galaxies, the advanced civilizations of the central and inner systems will also recruit some personnel from foreign civilizations. Zenozoi was once one of the recruits, but if you think about it carefully, similar incidents have also occurred in places like Earth, where resources are severely scarce. Of course, Li Ming, who once lived on Earth, has only heard that some people disappeared from Earth, possibly taken away by aliens. As for whether this is related, it is unknown. All this information was learned by Li Ming from the good-headed alien's mind. Of course, it was also mixed with some of his own memories. Knowing about the galactic war and the recruitment information, Li Ming will know why the Zenozoi has such a precious item. Obtaining Beiji is still one of Li Ming's most important things at the moment, but Li Ming's current things are not enough to exchange Beiji, so he can only give up temporarily. After a slight sigh, he said to himself, it seems that I can only trade some materials for the synthesis of Zingiao. But such a large trading station doesn't have the materials needed to synthesize Zingiao. Li Ming frowned slightly, but soon Li Ming understood. He snorted and turned away. Obviously, since the trading of BGUI requires star glory, the materials for synthesizing star glory have also become scarce. Moreover, for low-level civilizations, such materials are originally scarce. Li Ming was still thinking about something while walking out. The appearance of BGUI will inevitably cause a scarcity of many materials. Li Ming will definitely not be able to buy anything at this time, even if he is in other trading stations on Galap. But it is not difficult for Li Ming to really collect those things, because there are still many resources on Li Ming that have not been carefully examined. Li Ming's confident face has other plans. Before Onbidit Star, when Li Ming killed Bean and Bali, as well as Akbar and his son, he looted their star bags. Later, Li Ming sneaked up on Dali and snatched all the star capsules presented to him by the joint team. In addition to the star capsules and star bags on Dali, there are so many things in them. Needless to say, Li Ming didn't look closely, but he knew the amount of resources inside by roughly sensing it, so he was not worried about trading BGUI. Of course, Li Ming would not worry about another person who could come up with so many things. What Li Ming was thinking about now was whether Xenozoi really wanted to sell BGUI. The conditions proposed by the other party were too harsh, even exceeding the total amount of resources of a galaxy civilization. This was obviously abnormal. Although Li Ming himself was rich, he couldn't just think that the other party was preparing for him. After all, there was no second person like Li Ming in the entire outer system. Thinking of this, Li Ming planned to find another way to see if Xenozoi really wanted to trade BGUI. If it was true, Li Ming would trade directly. If it was fake, Li Ming didn't care. While thinking about something in his mind, his figure had already walked out of the portal. There were still people coming and going outside, and aliens were everywhere. Li Ming's eyes turned slightly, and several figures suddenly caught Li Ming's attention. Imogen? Nugent? Li Ming was still whispering. The flat head was obviously from the Inky Naya. Imogen and Nugent were both great magicians of the Inky Naya elemental tribe. It was not surprising for them to appear here. They must be trading resources or information. However, not far from the two of them, 3 Tabitha people appeared. Tam, Tate, and Talia. The 5 people stopped when they found each other. Needless to say, there was a past dispute between them, and it was obviously inappropriate to meet at this time. Under Li Ming's keen eyes, the thoughts in these people's minds were also detected. Li Ming was not interested in asking about this kind of thing, but one thing caught Li Ming's attention. The 2 great magicians of Inky Naya were actually going to trade with the Dina people. The Dina people were the race that sold BGUI. Only by contacting the Dina people could Li Ming deeply explore the authenticity of the BGUI transaction. Thinking in his mind, Li Ming smiled slightly and prepared to go forward. Just as Li Ming was about to leave, a tall figure walked past Li Ming. This person's slender figure kept twisting while walking, with a completely feminine aura. Li Ming did not move. His eyes were fixed on the guy who just walked past him. This person was a 9th level civilization, with a head like a gourd, and was the person Li Ming had just seen in the building. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 271, Inky Naya Supply Transaction. As soon as they saw the guy with a gourd-like head, Tam and others hurried forward, bowed their heads and said, "Lady Ivan." The gourd-headed alien named Ivan waved her hand casually, but Tam and others immediately whispered to her and kept looking at Imogen while talking. After hearing what they said, Ivan's face changed slightly, and she turned to look at Imogen and Nugent. There was a cold light flashing in her sharp eyes, and under her stern expression, she looked like she was going to take action. Imogen and Nugent were slightly startled, and after looking at each other, they didn't know what to do. Ivan snorted disdainfully and walked towards the two of them, which made Imogen and Nugent terrified and at a loss. Ivan stopped a few meters in front of Imogen, glanced at the two with contempt, and said, "You two dare to be my enemy? I don't want to embarrass you on this Gala planet. Leave all the resources on you, and I let you go," Ivan said coldly. After just 2 words, Her face was already a little impatient. Imogen and Nugent couldn't help but hesitate. The things they brought with them were used to trade with the Dana people, but if they didn't hand them over, they might not be able to pass the current level. Li Ming had all these little thoughts in his control, and it was also Li Ming's plan to have direct contact with the Dana people. He moved and walked over quickly. Even looked at the two people in front of her, hesitating and hesitant. Her face suddenly darkened, and she immediately snorted and raised her hand to do something. But at this moment, Li Ming's figure flashed and stood in front of Imogen and Nugent. As soon as she saw Li Ming, Ivan looked at him with puzzled eyes. But Tam and others standing behind Ivan screamed "Ah!" and shrank back, as if they were very afraid of Li Ming. Ivan noticed the movement behind her, and her eyes swept back and forth between Tam and Li Ming, and asked in a low voice, "Do you know this person?" Tam hurriedly whispered, "Lady Ivan, he is the guy who took the Mugsunetum. He is the guy who repelled the clones alone." Upon hearing this, Ivan was slightly surprised at first. After all, the artifact netting that she had been looking for suddenly appeared, but she couldn't help but frowned and hesitated when she heard the latter, because Ivan already knew about Li Ming's fight against the clones. At that time, the clones used the 9th level Stardust weapons, but they couldn't do anything to Li Ming. Thinking of this, Ivan's expression changed several times with a complex expression, and she didn't know what to do. However, Li Ming had already seen through her thoughts, and said bluntly, "I don't want to make things difficult for you on this Gala planet. Leave all the resources on you, and I will let you go." Li Ming's words were exactly the same as what Ivan had just said, and even the tone was somewhat similar. "You." Ivan's face changed suddenly. She snorted coldly and said, "Boy, the clones are afraid of you, but I'm not. Now that it comes to this, you and I really have to compete." Ivan was furious and was ready to fight, while the 3 9th level warriors behind her were also ready to fight together. Li Ming was relatively calm and did not care too much. The other party was still talking nonsense, but Li Ming suddenly stretched out his hand. Powerful energy came out, and the electromagnetic wave turned into a long snake that surrounded the people in front of him. Li Ming even said, "Damn it, just do it. Why are you talking so much nonsense? Are you filming a movie?" Exclamation mark. Li Ming muttered to himself and continued to increase the release of energy. In an instant, the light of electromagnetic waves shot up into the sky. These electromagnetic waves flew from Li Ming's body into the air in a spherical shape and suddenly soared into the sky with the sound of eagles. After leaving Li Ming, those electromagnetic waves turned into eagles soaring in the sky. Ivan, Tam and others were also surrounded by snake-shaped electromagnetic waves at this time and were almost in a passive state. But before Li Ming could continue to take action, a silver column suddenly flew down from the sky. This silver cylinder was 2 meters long and half a foot wide. It fell into the electromagnetic wave between Li Ming and Ivan with a bang. The surface of this object was as smooth as a mirror, and the whole thing was hard and heavy, like a piece of iron. The sudden fall startled Li Ming, and his figure could not help but step back slightly. Ivan on the opposite side also leaned back. Under this silver column, Li Ming's electromagnetic wave was directly interrupted, as if some energy had cut the electromagnetic wave in half. In astonishment, Li Ming raised his head slightly, squinted his eyes, and looked at the sky, only to see a giant spaceship had already arrived above Li Ming's area, and the silver pillar was released by this spaceship. The spaceship in the sky was triangular, not big, more than 10 meters long and wide, with a blue light at the bottom, and the light intertwined to form several characters "No fighting." Seeing this, Li Ming breathed a sigh of relief, and at the same time, the electromagnetic eagles flying in the sky also quickly fell back into Li Ming's body and disappeared. The electromagnetic waves disappeared little by little, and everything returned to calm. The silver pillar rose from the ground and returned to the triangular spaceship, and the spaceship slowly flew away from here. I don't know what kind of high-tech device the silver pillar is. It can not only interrupt energy transmission, but also absorb energy. It is really weird. The most important thing is that when Li Ming saw this silver, he thought of Adriana, and he still had some fear in his heart. This Babette trading station is obviously restricted. Forcing a fight here will inevitably cause trouble. This does not meet Li Ming's purpose of concealing himself. He glanced at Ivan, then his eyes returned to Imogen beside him and said, "Let's go." As he spoke, Li Ming, Imogen and Nugent left the place together. Watching Li Ming leave, Yvonne did not have any expression, but instead breathed a sigh of relief in her heart, as if she had escaped a disaster. Turning around and looking at Tam and others, she said sternly, "Let's go." Yvonne walked quickly towards the place where the spacecraft was parked. At this time, Li Ming accompanied Imogen and Nugent to a wide open space, far away from the huge building, and there were relatively few people. As soon as they stopped, the two of them hurriedly bowed deeply to Li Ming. Among them, Imogen said, "Thank you again for saving my life. I didn't expect." Li Ming smiled and waved his hand, saying, "You don't have to thank me for this. Aren't you going to trade with the Dina people? It's just right to take me with you." Li Ming didn't want to waste time talking nonsense, so he stated his purpose. As soon as he opened his mouth, Imogen and Nugent were suddenly shocked after hearing this, because the transaction with the Dina people could be said to be conducted in secret, so how did Li Ming know about it? Although the two were puzzled, they did not dare to ask more questions. Imogen nodded first and said, okay, then we will go now." With that said, Imogen and Nugent walked towards the spaceship berth together, and Li Ming followed closely behind them. Then Li Ming just followed behind, expressionless and silent, but Li Ming's mind was always thinking. Through his wisdom, Li Ming discovered that Imogen and Nugent were representing Kenai in daily transactions with the Dina people. The Dina people and the Kenai people have a supply relationship, because the Dina people's spaceships and equipment are all from Kenai, which is why the Dina people's spaceships are all meteorite spaceships. Li Ming and the Imogen people boarded their spaceship together, and then flew away from the Babette trading station together. The two of them kept operating in the main cabin of the spaceship, and sometimes communicated with other aliens online, but Li Ming sat far away without any expression or movement. Although Li Ming didn't ask anything, Imogen and Nugent still looked uncomfortable, and sometimes they would look at Li Ming. The two were also extremely confused, because they had no idea what Li Ming's purpose was, and they just felt extremely unnatural because of Li Ming's presence. After a short flight, the meteorite spacecraft arrived over a barren mountain, which was far away from the Babette trading station, and this barren mountain was also the only protruding peak within 100 miles. Chapter 272 Disguise. In the vast expanse of desert, this mountain looked particularly abrupt, like a stone suddenly appeared on the flat ground, abnormal and unnatural. After the meteorite spacecraft stopped, Imogen first glanced at Li Ming, then slowly stepped forward and whispered, "We have arrived at the place where we will trade with the Dina people." Li Ming's eyes, which were originally slightly closed, slowly opened, and he stood up and walked to the operating table. After a casual glance, his brows slightly frowned, and his eyes turned to look at Imogen beside him. "You are trading here?" Li Ming said with a questioning look. Imogen nodded repeatedly, but after seeing Li Ming's dissatisfied expression, he immediately said, "We have always traded here." Li Ming's expression did not change, and he continued to look at the operating table, thinking about something under his solemn expression. Seeing this, Imogen took a few steps forward and continued, "We have traded in other places before, but we never trade in their camp. I don't know the specific reason." Li Ming nodded suddenly, the corner of his mouth slightly raised, and said, "Since we are trading here, let's start." "Okay." Imogen nodded after agreeing, then stretched out his hand to the operating table and tapped it lightly. I saw a faint light flashing directly below the meteorite spacecraft, and a blue light beam shot down until it reached the mountain below. A few seconds later, two figures slowly fell from the light beam. They were Imogen and Li Ming. There was a dark cave entrance at the bottom of the boulder mountain. Imogen and Li Ming ran to the cave entrance as soon as they landed. As they slowly approached the cave entrance, the cave that seemed to be dark at first gradually became clear, and there was a faint light inside. The cave entrance was 7 or 8 meters long and wide, but as they went deeper, the cave became narrower and narrower, but the light became brighter and brighter, as if there was some lighting equipment in the depths of the cave. Li Ming narrowed his eyes and immediately saw the end of the cave. It was a circular open area, where an alien from the 7th level civilization was pacing back and forth, looking very anxious. The alien had 4 hands and 2 legs, and was slender, like a centipede, and a bit like a lizard. When he heard the footsteps, the alien suddenly turned his head and looked at the entrance of the cave and said anxiously, "You are late this time. Why did you make me wait for so long? Did you?" When he was halfway through, the alien suddenly paused and saw Li Ming behind Imogene. His astonished face suddenly changed, and he pointed at Li Ming with one hand, saying, "Who is he? Who asked you to bring outsiders here?" The alien immediately shouted angrily, even forgetting Li Ming's identity as a 9th level civilization. In terms of level, Imogene was naturally not afraid of this person, but since both parties were a cooperation of the entire civilization, he did not care. But Imogene was unable to answer the other party's accusation. With his eyes rolling slightly, Imogene was about to make an excuse to get out of it, when suddenly a green light flashed beside him, and a green hand suddenly stretched out. This green hand was in a completely phantom state. As soon as it stretched out, it came in front of the 7th level civilization. With a grab of 5 fingers, the head of the 7th level Dina was wrapped in green light. This action was too sudden and fast. Not to mention the 7th level civilization on the opposite side. Even Imogene, a 9th level, did not react. His eyes were wide open and his mouth was slightly open. For a moment, he did not understand Li Ming's intention, and was a little at a loss. Li Ming was calm, with a slight raise of the corner of his mouth, and his right hand suddenly retracted. With a light whoosh sound, the green shadow hand actually extracted the opponent's soul. Li Ming had used this method before. The so-called soul is actually the energy in the opponent's body. Without energy, the alien fell to the ground with a thump, no longer moving, and was already dead. Seeing this scene, Imogene looked at Li Ming in horror, unable to say a word, and Li Ming retracted the shadow arm in front of his eyes, staring at the soul-like energy body with his eyes, and couldn't help but smile. With a sudden force on his right hand, the shadow green light hand turned into a green vortex, and the soul body energy was directly swallowed in the vortex. After doing this, Li Ming's eyes turned slightly, looked at Imogene, and said, "Hand over the things." Imogene was shocked, looking at Li Ming's eyes, and said tremblingly, "Things? What, things? Huh?" Li Ming smiled lightly and continued, "Hand over the things you plan to give to the Dina people." Imogene was even more helpless now, and he didn't understand what Li Ming meant at all, but he still reluctantly raised his hand, took out a star bag, and handed it to Li Ming. The green light on Li Ming's right hand returned to his body. At the same time, he took the star bag, scanned the contents, nodded slightly, looked up at Imogene, and said, "You go." "Ah, okay." Imogene didn't dare to stay any longer. After hearing Li Ming's order, he turned around and left quickly. After Imogene left, Li Ming clenched his right hand and put away the star bag. Then he turned his eyes to the corpse on the ground. "Dobbert, your name is really bad." As he spoke, Li Ming slowly leaned down and reached out his right hand to touch the arm of the corpse on the ground. With a light touch, his fingers lifted up, and at the moment when his fingers left the other person's arm, a blood thread was drawn out from the skin of his arm. Looking at the blood thread, Li Ming's hand suddenly opened and turned into a palm, and the blood thread began to condense in the middle of the palm. Li Ming's operation was to extract the blood from his body bit by bit. After a while, a blood clot the size of an egg had formed in Li Ming's palm, and the blood thread was interrupted. Li Ming slowly stood up, turned his left hand, and a blue light flashed, and a bottle appeared in his hand. His eyes quickly turned to the bottle again, and at the same time, his right hand slowly came to the top of the bottle, and gently turned it over, and the blood clot tilted and flowed into the bottle. At this time, the left hand shook the bottle for a while, allowing the blood and the liquid inside to merge. The thing in the bottle was the camouflage potion that Li Ming brought from Inkinaya. It was one of the abilities of the magic tribe. Li Ming had fully mastered the configuration ability of this potion, so he also brought a lot of it with him. This potion can perfectly transform the body into other people or other species, and its concealment is almost absolute. The potion is paired with the biological sample that needs to be transformed, and after taking it, it can perfectly turn into the appearance of the creature. After Li Ming's left hand shook for a while, the blood and potion had completely merged. Looking at the potion, Li Ming frowned slightly. He took the bottle with his right hand, pinched his nose with his left hand, took a deep breath, raised the bottle, and poured it into his mouth. Ton, ton, ton. just like drinking water. Li Ming drank the whole bottle of liquid. According to Li Ming's experience of last transformation, the more he took, the longer the transformation time would be. In order not to reveal the flaw, Li Ming only prepared half a bottle. This disguise potion is indeed quite magical. Li Ming also heard about it in the mythical world, but he didn't expect it to become a reality now. His body twisted, and Li Ming's skin began to change first, followed by bones, flesh, and all body tissues. There was no pain, but after a few seconds, Li Ming had turned into Dobbit, which looked exactly like the corpse on the ground. Li Ming looked around, and touched his face and head with both hands. After confirming that they were the same, he smiled slightly. Now we can enter the Dina camp. Whispering like this, Li Ming turned his eyes, and glanced at the corpse on the ground. He pointed his right hand at it, and lightly tapped it, and an electromagnetic wave shot out from his fingertips. Bang! A sound was heard, white light flashed, and the corpse on the ground turned into ashes in an instant. After doing this, Li Ming walked out with confidence. Doobit is a 7th level civilization. Li Ming used the ability of Pan Long to conceal his own energy to the 7th level. In addition, all the information about Doobit's position and Doobit's brain were in Li Ming's control. With these, Li Ming can completely become a copy of Doobit, and will not be discovered by anyone. After walking out of the cave, Li Ming walked around the mountain to the left of the cave in trance. When he came to a huge rock 7 or 8 meters high at the foot of the mountain, Li Ming stretched out his hand and lightly touched it. A hatch suddenly opened on the huge rock, and Li Ming then walked in. Chapter 273 The Secret of the Dina People. The appearance looks like stone, like the mountain, but it is actually a small spaceship. Li Ming in the spaceship operated familiarly, coordinates, position, and quickly locked. Li Ming's eyes were also carefully looking at the screen on the console. The information about the Dina camp has gradually become clear. As the small spaceship slowly approached a mountain range, Li Ming fell into deep thought. This Dobbit doesn't know about BGUI. Li Ming whispered softly. Although Dobbit knew that people from his tribe were trading BGUI, he didn't know the detailed information and exact location of BGUI, such as whether BGUI really wanted to trade it out, or is this thing hidden in the camp storage room, or is it on someone? It's not surprising that the information is unclear. After all, Dobbit is only level 7. Li Ming's trip is to find out these things, and then find ways to get BGUI. Soon, the spaceship came to a mountain range, but this stretch of mountains is endless and there is no end in sight. What's even more weird is that the Dina people are hiding in this mountain range. At this time, the spaceship had already arrived above the target area and began to slowly descend. Li Ming took a quick glance at the area below and was surprised. From the perspective of the air, it did not look like there was a camp below. All he could see were natural rocks, not to mention buildings or spaceships. If he had not obtained Dobbit's memory, Li Ming would never have believed that this was a camp. This hidden camp was built with great difficulty, and most of the technology came from Inkinaya. Inkinaya's meteorite spaceship or meteorite building was made based on meteorites. Only the core components were made of metal, and the rest were meteorites or rocks. These meteorites and rocks were not all naturally generated. Some of them were petrified powder synthesized by Inkinaya technology. Petrified powder is a synthetic material that only needs a small amount to produce a large amount of rock. This time, Inkinaya's deal with the Dina people was petrified powder. The small spaceship that Li Ming was riding landed slowly and returned precisely to the original position of the small spaceship. Because of its stone appearance and its unique position, the small spaceship directly blended into the surrounding environment after landing, as if it had disappeared. This mountain range is relatively remote on this planet, and few people come here. However, the Dina people usually move around in this area. It is just that recently, the Dina people have something important to happen, so they hide. What is the hidden thing? Even Dobbit, a 7th level, does not know. Blue light shot out from the bottom of the small spaceship to the depths of the ground. Li Ming only felt the light flashing in front of his eyes, and his figure had appeared in a wide space. Aliens can be seen walking everywhere here, just like an underground world. As soon as Li Ming appeared, he walked straight to the distance familiarly. With Dobert's memory, the first thing Li Ming did after returning was to see the magician first. Li Ming shuffled quickly among the bustling aliens and soon came to a portal. After skillfully swiping it lightly, Li Ming went directly into it. Passing through this portal, Li Ming came to a huge cabin. This cabin is bowl-shaped, concave in the middle, and relatively high on the four sides. It is 500 or 600 meters long and wide, and it is extremely huge. Li Ming stood on the edge as soon as he appeared. "Dogbert, did you bring the stuff back?" An 8th level mage came over. Li Ming turned around and looked at the man, bowed and saluted, and replied, "It's already been brought back." "Yes." The mage responded with satisfaction and turned his eyes to the middle of the cabin. There was a huge meteorite floating in the middle of the cabin, but Li Ming knew that it was not a real meteorite, but a meteorite spaceship. The 8th level mage looked at the spaceship and said, "You will be responsible for painting the petrified powder. Zenozo will use it tomorrow." Disciple understands. Li Ming bowed his head and saluted. After explaining, the mage of the 8th level civilization turned and left. Soon, Li Ming was the only one left in the empty cabin. He looked at the spaceship in front of him with his eyes, and the painting work had already begun. There were many floaters on the high side of the perimeter. Li Ming stepped on the floaters and slowly came to the side of the spaceship. With a flip of his right hand, the star bag appeared in his hand. On the surface, Li Ming has started the work of Dogbert, but in his mind, Li Ming is already thinking about other things, because in the conversation just now, Li Ming has already obtained the information he wants from the brain of this 8th level magician. Beiji UI does exist, and it is also to be traded, but it is not in the camp, but on Xenozoi. Xenozoi will take a spaceship to the Silent Sacrifice Star tomorrow. The spaceship that Li Ming is now painting with petrifying powder is the spaceship that Xenozoi uses to go to the Silent Sacrifice Star. The Silent Sacrifice Star? Isn't that a planet with extremely poisonous gases? What is Xenozoi doing there? Li Ming once again had a series of questions. The 8th level magician just now knew limited information, but it was basically certain that Beiji UI existed, but Xenozoi was going to the Silent Sacrifice Star, and Li Ming had to find a way to get Beiji UI before he went to the Silent Sacrifice Star. No matter what the other party did on that poisonous planet, Li Ming was unwilling to go there. Thinking in his mind, Li Ming's hands did not stop, and he accelerated the painting. The petrified powder can form new rocks on the surface of the meteorite spacecraft. In addition to its strong concealment, it is also very useful for going to the Silent Sacrifice Star. According to the information, the poisonous gas of the Silent Sacrifice Star not only causes great damage to the body, but also has a strong corrosive effect on the spacecraft. The petrified powder applied can just avoid the erosion of the poisonous gas. While painting, Li Ming's consciousness could not help but enter the meteorite spacecraft. After a slight induction, Li Ming's expression suddenly tightened. "Brand new spacecraft," Li Ming whispered, and his eyebrows slightly raised. "This spacecraft is brand new, and all the instruments and equipment are also brand new, because most spacecrafts will set up information recognition, but the current spacecraft is blank." Li Ming's mouth corners slightly raised, and that consciousness slowly entered the spacecraft system. A series of footsteps came, and Li Ming was startled when he heard the sound. His head immediately turned and looked in the direction of the footsteps. He saw an alien of the 9th level civilization walking along the outer height, and his eyes kept looking at Li Ming. Li Ming did not dare to neglect it, and quickly bowed and said, "Grand Mage." The person who came was Ham Han, who waved his hand casually at Li Ming without paying any attention. Li Ming then continued to work, while Ham Han kept walking back and forth, always staring at the meteorite spaceship. The sudden appearance of this 9th order civilization made Li Ming not know whether to be happy or sad, because Li Ming originally planned to find the whereabouts of Xenozoi after the quick painting was completed. With Li Ming's strength, he would naturally be defeated by a general 9th order civilization, but the appearance of this 9th order civilization disrupted Li Ming's plan. Under its size, any behavior of Li Ming might lead to a situation that is unfavorable to him. If Xenozoi is alarmed, it will be even more difficult to succeed. On the surface, Li Ming was concentrating on his work, but in his heart he was still thinking about his own things. Although he could not go to find Xenozoi, this ninth order civilization also brought Li Ming a lot of other information, and it shocked Li Ming even more. Li Ming's eyes turned slightly in his eyes, his expression changed several times, and his twitching face was full of astonishment. The reason why that guy named Xenozoi went to the Star of Silence was to advance to the first level civilization. So, Xenozoi already possesses the power of flowing clouds and the brilliant moon. Li Ming's face changed several times and he muttered to himself. At this moment, Ham Han, who was watching from a distance, suddenly said, "Dobbit, be serious. This is a very important matter." Li Ming turned around quickly and replied, "Yes, Grand Mage." He continued to work with his hands, but his heart was already turbulent. There is no doubt that this Xenozoi is indeed extraordinary. After returning from the central system, Li Ming's expression has solidified, and his body works like a robot, his eyes blinking from time to time, his lips opening and closing from time to time. Facing the meteorite spaceship in front of him, Li Ming carefully and seriously painted it. So, Xenozoi possesses the power of flowing clouds, the brilliant moon and Beigi, three things. Chapter 274 Infiltration. Li Ming's hands couldn't help but tremble slightly while he was working. He was excited, surprised, and surprised. No matter how excited he was, Li Ming had to suppress it by force. He couldn't reveal any flaws at this time, but this excitement was beating in every cell, making Li Ming forget everything. Li Ming's spiritual civilization ability can restore his mood to normal. Although he knew the secret about Xenozoi, Li Ming still had to find a complete plan. To get everything from Xenozoi, killing the other party is the only way, preferably before the other party sets out for the Star of Silence. Thinking so in his mind, Li Ming's hand has quietly stretched out, and the green light flashed in the palm of his hand, turning into a phantom little green dragon. Taking advantage of Ham Han's unpreparedness in the distance, he suddenly swung it, and the little green dragon flew out of his hand, and merged into the cabin wall and disappeared. This is exactly the ability of Li Ming's wisdom eye, the flying dragon. Releasing the flying dragon is to find the whereabouts of Xenozoi. The phantom flying dragon is not restricted by any material, just like a transparent object can penetrate any obstacle. With the flying dragon, Li Ming can freely find the person he wants to find. Filong was exploring everywhere, while Li Ming was painting at ease. Time passed little by little. The underground camp of the Dina people was indeed not small, but for Filong, who had the ability to penetrate, the exploration was also very fast. Li Ming didn't know how long it had been, but the painting work was almost completed, and Filong had explored back and forth several times. Li Ming frowned slightly, and thought to himself, Xenozoi is not here? It shouldn't be. Since we are going to take this meteorite spaceship to the Silent Sacrifice Star, there is no reason why she is not in the camp. Li Ming showed a puzzled expression, and his eyes were full of complex colors. Filong explored the entire underground camp back and forth several times, but except for Ham Han, the 9th level, he did not find any other 9th level, let alone the whereabouts of Xenozoi. In order to ensure that everything was foolproof, Li Ming also asked Filong to explore the area outside the camp, but there was still no result. This made people wonder. A person who was going to take a spaceship to the Silent Sacrifice Star was not in the camp, but the spaceship was there, which was completely inconsistent with common sense. Unconsciously, the painting work has been completed, and the meteorite spaceship in front of him is even more brand new. The thick rock coating makes the spaceship more concealed. If you don't get close and explore carefully, you can't find that it is a spaceship. While Li Ming was working, Ham Han was watching beside him. He took this matter very seriously with a serious expression. Looking at the meteorite spaceship in front of him, Ham Han nodded slightly and smiled. Not bad. As he spoke, his eyes had already looked up and down at the spaceship, and finally his eyes stopped on Li Ming, saying, Dobbit, you step down first. Li Ming bowed his head and replied, yes. But with such a simple conversation, Li Ming received a message again. His eyebrows jumped slightly, and he immediately realized something. After Ham Han gave the order, he turned and entered a portal, but Li Ming did not leave immediately. After seeing Ham Han leave, Li Ming moved, came to the front of the meteorite spaceship, stretched out his right hand, and supported the surface of the meteorite spaceship. A trace of blue light shot out from the meteorite spaceship. Just like light shooting into water, the light can be clearly seen. The soft blue light soon enveloped Li Ming's entire figure. At this time, the spaceship, which was originally on the surface of the rock, also turned into nothingness under the blue light, as if a door was opened on the surface of the spaceship. Li Ming's eyes turned, and after a casual look around, his figure quickly entered it. Passing through this blue light, Li Ming entered the interior of the spaceship, while the blue light outside slowly faded and returned to its original appearance. Li Ming chose to enter this meteorite spaceship for a reason, because Li Ming got a message from Ham Han's brain. That is, this spaceship will be transported to another place through directional transmission. It is no wonder that Xenozoi is not here. Ham Han came to a control room through the portal. The control room is located diagonally above the cabin just now, from which any changes in the entire cabin can be seen. Ham Han checked the control console first, then tapped a screen. The screen flickered, and circles of ripples spread out. Then an alien face emerged from it. It was Xenozoi. The painting of the spacecraft has been completed. I will send it over now, Ham Han said while looking at the screen. Xenozoi inside nodded with satisfaction and replied, very good. After confirming, Ham Han closed the connection, and tapped another small operator with his right hand. This operator was only the size of a palm, and was also covered with blue light. It was roughly the same as the operating table, but the size was different. With such a light tap, the huge ball-shaped cabin had undergone a huge change. The bottom and edge of the cabin began to make bang 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 sounds, and one by one, the light spots lit up, just like turning on a lamp. The light spots on the four walls were only the size of a basketball, but the one at the bottom was 2 meters long and wide. These light spots became brighter and stronger. After a few seconds, a sizzling sound suddenly came from them. Each light spot released a strong electric current, and the entire cabin was instantly enveloped by electric light, and all the electric currents revolved around the meteorite spaceship in the middle, dazzling and almost impossible to look directly at. After a moment, the electric light engulfed the entire meteorite spaceship. Except for the light, nothing else could be seen, but this situation only lasted for a moment, and then a muffled bang sound was heard. The electric light disappeared instantly, and at the same time, the meteorite spaceship disappeared. Looking at all this, Ham Han looked calm, as if he had accomplished something. Li Ming was hiding in a cabin in the spaceship at this moment, motionless, only to feel the entire spaceship suddenly shaking, and his body also shook slightly. In less than a second, everything returned to calm. Although he was inside the spaceship, Li Ming still clearly knew that this spaceship was teleporting over a short distance under the action of external force. The transmission of the spaceship comes from two powers. One is the energy of the internal system of the spaceship, and the other is the external energy. The calmness at this time is that the spaceship has been teleported to the target place under the action of external force. Li Ming released the flying dragon again with a calm expression. At this time, Xenozoi was sitting quietly in a cabin, looking at the meteorite spaceship in front of him, nodding his head slightly, then raising his hand and gently tapping the meteorite spaceship in front of him. Buzz! With a sound, the meteorite spaceship trembled, and a blue light suddenly appeared on the surface, like a ball of fire. The blue light spread quickly, forming an irregular shape, like a ball of fire suddenly ignited from the middle of a piece of paper, and then spread to the surroundings. After a moment, the blue light stopped, and a portal appeared in front of him. Xenozoi moved and walked inside. Passing through the blue light, Xenozoi came to the main cabin of the spaceship, looking at the operating table with his eyes, and stepped forward to operate it. Li Ming was sitting cross-legged on the ground in another cabin at this moment, motionless. The flying dragon he released had explored the surrounding environment and situation completely, which made Li Ming's face change slightly. This turned out to be Babette Trading Station, Li Ming said in surprise. According to the perspective obtained by the flying dragon outside, the location of this meteorite spaceship was exactly on the top floor of Babette Trading Station, and this location made Li Ming feel even more difficult. It is absolutely impossible to take action here. The previous conflict with Ivan is an example. There are fixed people maintaining order at the Babette Trading Station. It is impossible to let go of the fight here. Unable to take action, Li Ming's thoughts began to change, because Li Ming's original plan was to take action directly. Now restricted by the external environment, Li Ming must think of a new way immediately. Otherwise, he will really have to follow Xenozoi to the Star of Silent Sacrifice. Li Ming was still thinking about countermeasures, and Xenozoi had already started her own plan. The light on the operating table intertwined, and the teleportation point in the outer space of the galley star had been locked. At the same time, the top of the building made a squeaking sound, and the round top unfolded piece by piece like a flower bud, and the meteorite spacecraft was completely exposed. Chapter 275, The Star of Silence. Zzzz sounds were heard, and the surface of the meteorite spaceship was pulsating with electric light. The transmission system had been activated. Li Ming, who was in one of the cabins, naturally noticed something was wrong, but he had not found a better way yet, so he could only let the spaceship run. Bang, the remaining electric light turned into starlight, and diluted and disappeared in the air, and the meteorite spaceship was no longer visible. After feeling the vibration of the transmission power, Li Ming's originally anxious mood suddenly returned to calm. Since the spaceship has been transmitted, it is undoubtedly that Li Ming has missed the opportunity to take action on the galley star. Now he can only wait until the spaceship arrives at the Silent Sacrifice Star to make other plans. The Silent Sacrifice Star is an unknown planet for Li Ming and other civilizations. The only information that can be confirmed is that this planet is full of poisonous gas and extremely dangerous. This is also the reason why Li Ming tried his best to take action on the galley star. There is no other way now. Even if it is risky, Li Ming will try it. After all, it is a flowing cloud force and a rare brilliant moon, and there is also a Bay GUI. Such a big temptation is completely worth Li Ming's attempt and risk. Thinking in his mind, Li Ming gradually concentrated and closed his eyes, feeling the transmission of the spacecraft, while preparing for the arrival at the Silent Sacrifice Star. After several transmissions, the meteorite spacecraft arrived at the outer space of the Silent Sacrifice Star. The Silent Sacrifice Star and the Galley Star are not far away. Both belong to the Chaos Star system. The two planets are also naturally different. From the space, the Galley Star is barren. Most of the area is rocky mountains, and a small part is desert, giving people a sense of desolation, but the stationing of many camps also adds some vitality to the planet. Looking at the Silent Sacrifice Star again, the overall blue and green are mixed. At first glance, it seems to be somewhat similar to the Earth, but there are some differences. The Earth looks like a blue planet, because the ocean occupies a large area. The blue part and green part of the Silent Sacrifice Star are mixed, and it is relatively cloudy. It looks comfortable, but there is no other strange feeling. Such a planet cannot make people associated with poison gas. Xenozoi looked at the operating table in front of him. The entire Silent Sacrifice Star was in the blue light of the operating table. Looking at such a planet, Xenozoi's muscles under his eyes trembled slightly, and the expression on his face was not very good. He stretched out his right hand and gently moved it in the blue light, and the Silent Sacrifice Star also rotated in the direction of his finger, just like rotating a globe. Xenozoi's sharp eyes were looking for the most suitable teleportation point. Xenozoi was looking for it, and suddenly a ripple flashed in the outer space of Gallagher Star. Just like a drop of water suddenly fell into this airspace, and then rippled slightly. After the ripples, a silver spaceship appeared. This silver spaceship was Adriana's spaceship. Adriana was looking at the mirror-like operating table in the main cabin. After a circle of ripples flashed, a light spot suddenly flashed. Adriana's eyes widened a little, and her mouth couldn't help but open slightly. Sure enough, it's here. As she said this, Adriana stretched out her hand and gently touched the light spot. The area centered on the light spot quickly expanded and became clear. The buildings of the Babette trading station soon appeared on the operating table. Adriana's eyes turned and stopped at the place where the spaceship was parked. Then she clicked again, and the transmission position was determined. The entire silver spaceship twisted again, like a deformed colloid, and disappeared directly after just 1 or 2 seconds. At this time, Xenozoi also determined the position. She lightly clicked her finger, and the meteorite spaceship trembled slightly. The surface arc jumped, the light flashed, and it disappeared on the spot with a bang. Gusts of wind rolled up layers of waves, and the seawater hit the rocks on the coast, making a snapping sound, one layer after another. This isolated island is located in the middle of the sea. It is not large in size, and has no green plants. It is all made up of uneven rocks. At this time, the sky suddenly flashed with lightning, the clouds and mists whirled, and a strange phenomenon appeared. A meteorite spaceship appeared directly above the island. The electric light gradually dissipated, and the meteorite spaceship stopped moving. The surrounding environment and appearance were reflected on the operating table. Xenozoi watched quietly, nodded slightly with satisfaction, and stretched out his hand to point again, and the meteorite spaceship began to slowly land. This island was carefully found by Xenozoi. The island is made entirely of rocks, and the color and appearance of the rocks are very similar to the meteorite spaceship, which provides favorable conditions for concealment. With a muffled sound of bang, the meteorite spaceship landed in the rocky area in the center of the island. After the huge spaceship landed in this way, it was not only not abrupt, but very natural, as if it was originally a part of it. At this time, a series of information popped up on the operating table, all of which were commands after the system successfully landed. Xenozoi turned and came to a bulkhead, pressed lightly on the bulkhead, and a grey light flashed. A small hatch opened on the bulkhead, just like a cabinet was opened, and there were spherical objects inside. Xenozoi stretched out her hand, and took out a bead. The bead was grey, and looked like a piece of soil. She clenched her hand tightly, and the bead suddenly broke into pieces, and turned into grey dust, which floated along Xenozoi's arm. After a few seconds, the dust formed a grey film that completely wrapped Xenozoi's body. After doing this, Xenozoi's eyes returned to the other beads. She stretched out her hand and a blue light flashed in her palm. All the beads were collected. Xenozoi's series of operations were seen by Li Ming's flying dragon. Hiss. Li Ming took a breath in confusion and thought to himself, is this thing an equipment to shield poison gas? Thinking of this, Li Ming couldn't help but reach out and touch his chin. Xenozoi came prepared, but Li Ming didn't have these equipment, which made it even more difficult. Thilang continued to watch secretly in the dark, while Xenozoi had come to the other side of the bulkhead. He stretched out his hand again, and the blue light spread out. Just like when Xenozoi entered the spaceship before, it was the transmission device. However, Xenozoi did not go out immediately. Instead, he looked down at his 4 hands and the whole body, and after confirming that they were all wrapped in the grey film, he walked out of the blue light. After leaving the spaceship, Xenozoi came to the outside world. With the protective device on his body, he would not be corroded by the poison gas. This made Xenozoi smile with satisfaction, and his eyes turned to look at a mountain on the island, and his figure followed there. Li Ming's flying dragon saw all of this, and asked the flying dragon to continue to follow the other party, but Li Ming, who was in the cabin, was full of hesitation and hesitated. Through the flying dragon, Li Ming could see all the situations in the outside world, but no matter how he looked, Li Ming could not find the so-called poison gas. Could it be transparent poison gas? Li Ming whispered to himself, but according to the surrounding environment, none of the transparent poison gas that Li Ming knew could be generated in this environment. It shouldn't be. Li Ming continued to look at Xenozoi, who was walking away, and he didn't know what to do. There are only 2 reasons for the current situation. One is that there is no poison gas here at all, and the other is that there may be a poison gas that Li Ming doesn't know. No matter which one it is definitely not okay for Li Ming to stay in the cabin like this. Thinking of this, Li Ming's eyes narrowed and decided to try it himself. He stood up and came to the wall next to him. He stretched out his right hand and gently touched the wall with his palm. A faint light flickered and blue light spread out. The portal to the outside has been opened. Li Ming activated his energy and wrapped himself with an electromagnetic energy shield. After hesitating for a while, he tried to slowly stretch out his right hand. The palm penetrated the portal, just like reaching out from a window, and touched the air outside. The palm did not feel strange, and then the whole arm, head, and body slowly came out bit by bit. After his entire body was completely outside, Li Ming did not feel anything strange, and then he removed the electromagnetic wave shield on the surface of his body. A gust of sea breeze blew, and the fresh air entered his body from his mouth and nose, and he felt refreshed and comfortable. End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.